The air in the throne room was thick with the stench of fear and fresh blood. A hush had fallen upon the assembled court, a silence that weighed more than any of them could bear. Sansa Stark's world swirled with grief, confusion, and dread. She had just witnessed her father's head fall from the executioner's sword days ago, and now she stood in the same hall, trembling. King Joffrey Baratheon, golden-haired and cruel-eyed, reigned from the Iron Throne with a smugness that made her stomach twist. In the uncertain days since Lord Eddard Stark's public beheading, King's Landing had grown more precarious. Rumors roiled through the corridors of the Red Keep like a feverish wind. Lords and ladies walked on tiptoe around Joffrey's fancies, terrified of being the next to glimpse the headsman's blade. Tyrion Lannister had only just returned to King's Landing at the command of his father, Lord Tywin Lannister, to serve as Hand of the King, or so he had believed. He had arrived in the city with caution, still carrying the taste of victory from the Mountains of the Moon, still harboring illusions that perhaps, despite Ned Stark's tragic end, his cunning might keep the realm from plunging entirely into chaos. But the realm was already in chaos. The footfalls of war echoed across the Seven Kingdoms. The North rose in outrage at Ned Stark's execution. The Riverlands smoldered against Lannister armies, and Stannis Baratheon was rumored to be preparing his own claim on the Iron Throne. All eyes turned warily upon King's Landing, where the boy King Joffrey displayed an alarming hunger for violence. All Tyrion wanted, in his heart of hearts, was to survive and, if possible, mitigate the worst of Joffrey's cruelty. Tyrion had come to the throne room for his first official appearance, only to discover a sense of dread creeping along the length of his spine as he noticed the taut expressions on the faces of the courtiers. Cersei Lannister stood beside Joffrey, wringing her hands behind the folds of her gown, tellingly anxious. Grand Maester Pycelle hovered near the steps leading up to the throne, stroking his long white beard with shaky fingers. Peter Baelish wore his customary half-smile, but his eyes flickered too often to the king. Even Lord Varys seemed more subdued than usual, gliding in the background like a shadow. Sansa, forced to witness yet another spectacle, tried to remain perfectly still at the foot of the throne. She kept her lips tightly pressed, offering up silent prayers to the Seven to guide her through whatever horror was about to unfold. A hush blanketed the hall as Joffrey rose. He was clad in rich crimson velvet trimmed with gold, an image of Lannister wealth and power, though still a lanky boy in so many ways. "My lords and ladies," he began, his voice carrying the practiced arrogance that he had learned from his mother. "It has come to my attention that we have a traitor in our midst." Tyrion frowned, scanning the crowd. "Another traitor, your grace?" he asked drily, loud enough for some to hear, but not so loud as to be a direct challenge. He had survived this long by picking his battles. "Who is it this time?" Joffrey's gaze speared him. The pale eyes of the boy king glimmered with something akin to delight in cruelty. "You, uncle," he said. A flicker of disbelief crossed Tyrion's features, quickly concealed by a sarcastic half-smile. He glanced at Cersei, who gave him a wide-eyed look of helplessness. Already, he felt the precariousness of the situation slide out from beneath him like loose sand. "Surely I misunderstand your grace," Tyrion replied, his tone careful. "For I have ever been loyal to House Lannister and to you." The king tapped his fingers on the arm of the Iron Throne, a gesture that rang faintly on the twisted metal. "Yes, loyal," he mocked. "Loyal enough to let my father's enemies slip through the veil. Loyal enough to cuckold me with your cunning. Loyal enough to question my decisions at every turn. Your father, Lord Tywin, was so eager to make you Hand of the King, as if I needed a—" He spat the word. "Dwarf to guide me. I am king. I need no one." An uneasy stirring ran through the assembled courtiers. Tyrion forced a bright smile. "And I am merely here to serve your grace." "If I've offended—" "Offended," Joffrey repeated. He laughed, shrill and hard. "I'll tell you how you have offended me, uncle. You've conspired against me. You've tried to steal my mother's affections and turn her against me." Tyrion's mouth parted, a slight gap of astonishment. His gaze quickly darted to Cersei, who met his eyes then looked away. His sister wore a tortured expression, but Tyrion could not decipher if it was genuine or contrived. She was as capable of deception as anyone in Westeros. Sansa watched with wide eyes, her thoughts whirling. The courtyard where her father had died seemed to float back into her mind. She feared what might happen next. Despite what Tyrion was, despite him being a Lannister, she held no personal hatred for the dwarf. He had never frightened her the way Joffrey did. Peter Baelish stepped forward. "Your Grace," he said smoothly, "perhaps we might retire to the council chamber to address these concerns? Accusations of conspiracy are grave indeed." "I am king," Joffrey repeated, eyes flaming. "I do not need your counsel or your permission. This is treason." "Treason, is it?" Tyrion asked, more softly now, trying to keep his composure. "Who has leveled this charge?" It was then that a voice called out from the side. Cersei's voice. He admitted to me that he would see you replaced with Tommen, my sweet boy." She paused, a tremor running through her. "He said that you were too dangerous, Joffrey." The words slammed into Tyrion like a warhammer. "Cersei," he rasped in disbelief, though a flicker of understanding dawned upon him. This had to be Joffrey's manipulation, some vile scheme to isolate himself at the pinnacle of power, or else it was Cersei's desperate measure to quell her son's rage. His sister, still avoiding his gaze, pressed a trembling hand to her cheek. "What was I to do?" she asked, voice pitched so only those closest could hear. "He threatened to bring ruin on the family by instigating war with the North." Tyrion's heart pounded in his chest. He looked at the Kingsguard who surrounded the hall. He saw Meryn Trant and Boros Blunt, their hands on sword hilts, waiting for the order. He caught a glimpse of the Hound, Sandor Clegane, standing near the dais, jaw clenched tight. "I am your blood," Tyrion said, turning his gaze on Joffrey, then on Cersei. "What madness is this?" Joffrey's lips curled. "Blood or no, I will not suffer traitors. You dare conspire against me, dwarf, and for your treachery you will die." A murmur of alarm swept the throne room. Tyrion's wits raced, but the weight of the moment pressed down on him. He remembered the threat of war on all sides. He remembered how the only reason House Lannister still held the advantage was because of the gold and armies of Tywin Lannister. He remembered his father's instructions. Keep Joffrey in check. Secure the throne. But Joffrey was unhinged. A rabid dog who bit at any hand, friend or foe. Tyrion sucked in a quick breath. "Your Grace, if you do this, you are turning on your own family." "My father." "Your father is off fighting our battles," Joffrey cut in. "And I am here in charge. That is all that matters. Seize him." The Kingsguard stepped forward. Tyrion attempted a final protest. "Think, you fool," he spat, letting fear slip away in favor of anger. "If you kill me, what do you think Lord Tywin will?" His voice was cut off by Boros Blunt's gauntlet clamping over his shoulder. Another guard yanked him backward, forcing him to the marble floor. His mind spun with an almost detached clarity. He must reason with Joffrey. He must survive. "Cersei," he called to his sister. "Think of father, think of Jaime. You cannot allow this." Yet Cersei only shrank back, her features torn. And in Sansa's eyes, Tyrion saw a flash of pity. Her slender hands twisted in front of her skirts, but she could do nothing. They were all helpless before the Boy King. Joffrey laughed again, high and cruel, as though the fear in the room was wine for him to drink. "I will be merciful and spare you a long speech," he told Tyrion with relish. "You have conspired against the crown. Therefore you must die." The dwarf tried one last tactic. "I demand a trial," he said. "I am a lord of Casterly Rock. I have the right." Joffrey's hand sliced the air, dismissing him. "You have no rights before me, traitor. Take him to the courtyard. Let all see what happens to those who think they can manipulate me." A tide of Kingsguard forcibly dragged Tyrion away. The hall erupted into frantic whispers, but no one dared intervene. The whisper that was loudest came from Peter Baelish, who murmured, "Your Grace, Perhaps consider the consequences. Joffrey's glare cut him short. Do not cross me, Lord Baelish. Sansa stood rooted, tears gathering in her eyes, remembering her father's last moments. She saw how Tyrion's eyes, wide with fear but still somehow defiant, met hers for an instant before the guards took him from the hall. She saw the faintest glimmer of some strange, sad apology in that look. She could not move, could not speak. She was an ornament in a cage, powerless. The throne room emptied as courtiers followed the spectacle. The Queen Regent lingered, warring with herself, perhaps. Varys drifted across the floor, an unreadable mask. Littlefinger scurried after the departing crowd, face stricken though carefully composed. Cersei watched them all, then approached the throne, turning on her son with subdued panic. Joffrey, do you understand what you have done? Your grandfather will. Grandfather is my servant, as are you, Joffrey declared. He is waging war on my behalf. It is time we cleanse this city of all doubts. And you truly believe? She cut off, swallowing, and forced a smile for the sake of the onlookers. You must reconsider. Joffrey shook his head. I am the king. Come, mother, you must stand by me. I will not be questioned. Though she shuddered, Cersei found herself nodding. She had sown the seeds of her own doom by failing to restrain her son. Now all she could do was watch in horror. In the Red Keep's courtyard, the sky was a bleak gray. The wind seemed to moan at the edges of the battlements, as if lamenting the carnage that was about to unfold. Tyrion Lannister knelt in the center of a quickly assembled crowd. A weathered block used for beheadings stood near him. Perhaps, Tyrion thought wryly, it was the same one used for Ned Stark, though that had occurred outside the September. His life had become a twisted echo of the man whose head Joffrey had flung to the crowds. The dwarf's heart hammered in his chest. A million barbed regrets stung his mind. He thought of Shae, the woman he had left behind outside the city's gates for fear of drawing attention. He thought of Bronn, his mercenary companion. Where was Bronn now? Possibly in a tavern, or possibly striding here as fast as he could. But no Sellsword would openly challenge the king and the entire Kingsguard to rescue one dwarf. Around him, the hush was lethal. He saw glimpses of the court. Baelish standing near a column, expression neutral. Varys, hands clasped in his voluminous sleeves. Sansa Stark, trembling, tears threatening to spill. And the king, Joffrey, perched on a small dais hastily erected so he could watch from above. Cersei was at her son's side, face pale. Seldom had Tyrion felt so small. He had grown used to surviving by wit, by cunning words that turned his enemies into unwitting allies or had them underestimating him. But Joffrey's madness had escalated beyond reason. He recalled his father's last command, "Go to King's Landing. Keep my grandson safe. Keep him from making a fool of himself." This was no mere foolishness. This was monstrous. A Kingsguard forced Tyrion to place his head on the block. He resisted enough to twist his head aside and shout, "If you do this, you sever the neck of House Lannister, boy." Joffrey gave a thin smile. "So be it." Tyrion looked to his sister one last time. "Cersei, speak sense to him." His voice cracked. "I am your brother." Cersei's eyes gleamed with unshed tears, but something hardened her face. She could not or would not oppose Joffrey now. The spectacle had gone too far, and any show of mercy might be taken as weakness by the entire court. She parted her lips but said nothing. The watchers shuffled uneasily, some glancing away, others straining to see every detail. A hush fell. The headsman, the same man who had once swung the sword for Ned Stark's final blow, approached. He lifted his blade. Tyrion closed his eyes, a jolt of terror seizing his limbs. In that moment, his mind flew to memories. Reading in the library at Casterly Rock, drinking with his brother Jaime, making japes in Winterfell's courtyard, kissing Shae's neck in the darkness of a tent, the faint smell of lilacs on her hair, then a savage rush of clarity. It was truly ending here. There would be no chance to orchestrate an escape. No last cunning plan. Just the headsman's sword, swift and cold. The whisper of steel filled his ears. A heartbeat later, pain. A blinding, sudden flash, then darkness. Gasps flickered through the crowd. Blood pooled on the stones. The blade had severed the dwarf's head from his body in a single powerful sweep. King Joffrey stood, looking down with satisfaction at the remains of his uncle. A muttering rose from the onlookers. Shock, fear, disbelief. Here was a Lannister, the imp, a cunning man who had once outsmarted everyone from the Ares jailers to savage clansmen in the Mountains of the Moon. Now ended. A hush seemed to smother the courtyard, as if no one dared to exhale too loudly. Sansa Stark's knees began to buckle. She felt a swirl of nausea and tears, remembering her father's end, now multiplied by this new terror. To think that a king would kill his own uncle so brazenly. Fear for her own life, and for her brother Robb's safety, pressed like iron on her chest. Standing next to Joffrey, Cersei lost the battle with her composure. She let out a ragged cry, burying her face in her hands. It was done, she realized with horror. The twisted bond that had held House Lannister together. Her father's iron will, Jaime's skill, Tyrion's cunning, was fraying. This act would not go unpunished, not even within their own family. Above, ravens circled the Red Keep as if drawn by the scent of blood. One cawed, then another. It echoed across the yard, mingling with the quiet sobs of a few onlookers. Littlefinger gave a perfunctory nod, as though acknowledging the final inevitability, while Varys turned away, his expression stony. King Joffrey's voice, breaking the hush, boomed. Take the head. Let the traitor's skull join the other traitors on the walls. Let it serve as a warning. The crowd was slow to disperse, many casting uncertain glances at the Queen Regent. She tried, belatedly, to regain her mask of composure. You heard your king, Cersei said tremulously. Return to your duties. Sansa stood rooted, tears staining her cheeks, as the battered corpse of Tyrion Lannister was hauled away. When the courtyard finally began to empty, she turned, half fainting, and retreated into the Red Keep's labyrinthine corridors, the guards following close at her heels. It occurred to her that the city might erupt in chaos. If the Lannisters could kill their own blood, who was safe now? Above it all, Joffrey stood on the dais, savoring his power in the hush that followed the spectacle, as if the realm itself must bend to him. Inside the keep, the seeds of rebellion and disaster were being sown. For though Joffrey might be king, he was not the real power in House Lannister, and the true lion Tywin was far from King's Landing. Yet no distance would keep him from learning what had transpired. In the Riverlands, the Lannister army had camped along the banks of the Red Fork. Ser Gregor Clegane's outriders had scoured the villages, leaving behind a trail of terror and ash. Lord Tywin Lannister, seated in a makeshift command tent, meticulously studied a map by candlelight. Behind him, the restless clamor of the camp stretched into the night. Soldiers murmured around fires, horses snorted in the picket lines, and the occasional bark of a commanding officer rang through. Tywin was never a man for displaying emotion. His face was carved from granite, his eyes cold, his mouth pressed into a perpetual line. Yet this night, a flicker of tension radiated from him. He had received word that his son, Tyrion, had returned to King's Landing. Good. Tyrion, for all his flaws, had a sharp mind. He might handle Joffrey better than Cersei could, or so Tywin had believed. Suddenly, the flap of the tent rustled. A messenger, dusty from the road, entered and knelt. "My lord," he said, voice trembling, "I bring you news from King's Landing." Tywin looked up slowly from the map. "What news?" The messenger's face was pale, as though delivering these tidings was as dangerous as carrying wildfire. "Your son, my lord, Tyrion. He was executed by King Joffrey's order." For a moment, Tywin did not breathe. He stared at the messenger, stone still, the silence pressing so thick that nearby men in the tent swallowed and stepped away. "Elaborate," Tywin said at last, his tone sharp as a sword's edge. The messenger's words came in a jumble. He was accused of treason, conspiracies against the crown, The king ordered him beheaded in the Red Keep's courtyard. No trial. The rumors say that Queen Cersei tried to intervene, but Tywin raised a hand, halting the flow. His expression did not change, but for a second his jaw clenched. The tent seemed to shrink around him, as if the entire world had narrowed to a single point of fury. His mind reeled at the foolishness. The unthinkable had happened. A Lannister executed a Lannister. He recalled how he had orchestrated every move to strengthen House Lannister. He had placed Joffrey on the throne, recognized the boy as Jaime's son for the sake of securing the monarchy. And now that same boy had snuffed out Tyrion's life on a whim. He closed his eyes, exhaling slowly. He had not expected to feel such a pang of grief. Tyrion had always been the black sheep in many ways, but Tywin had come to appreciate his cunning, especially after the fiasco in the Vale and the events at the Green Fork. When he opened his eyes, a cold, calculating rage shimmered in them. "Leave me," he told the messenger. "Speak of this to no one." The man bowed and fled. In the hush that followed, Tywin leaned over the map, pressing his palms against it. He saw the swirling lines of the Riverlands, the scattered tokens representing his forces, Robb Stark's forces, and the uncertain allegiances of the local lords. Yet his thoughts were a tempest. This changed everything. He had expected Tyrion to keep Joffrey's worst impulses in check. Without Tyrion, the king would run amok, and the realm's hatred for the boy would only deepen. His mouth tightened. Lord Tywin was not given to displays of warmth, but he understood the ramifications. Tyrion dead. The damage to House Lannister's unity was incalculable. Tywin could not ignore that Joffrey might one day lash out at Jaime or even Cersei if it pleased him. A beast was perched on the Iron Throne, wearing a golden crown. But Tywin Lannister was not about to let that beast devour all he had built. "Ser Kevin," he called, raising his voice. His brother entered the tent at once, noticing Tywin's expression. "What has happened?" Kevin asked, alarmed. Tywin looked at him calmly, though a muscle in his cheek twitched. "Joffrey has executed Tyrion." Kevin's eyes widened. "7 hells." "Precisely," Tywin said. "We march for King's Landing at once. The boy king must be put back on a leash." Kevin swallowed. "But Robb Stark, he threatens our supply lines. If we abandon Harrenhal and the field." Tywin's glare silenced him. "This war on 2 fronts can wait. The king has destroyed a crucial piece of our house. I will not have him destroy the rest." He spoke with a calm that rang with finality. "Send word to the local garrisons. We are consolidating. The Riverlands can smolder for the moment, but we must secure King's Landing before the entire realm rises against us in outrage." Kevin bowed his head. "Yes, my lord." He paused. "I am very sorry, Tywin." A flinch of pain appeared in Tywin's eyes and vanished. "I have no time for sorrow, Kevin. We have a realm to hold, for better or worse. But this I vow, Joffrey will regret what he has done." And so the Lannister camp erupted into a flurry of orders. Banners were pulled down and rolled, tents struck, horses saddled. Within a day, they were on the move, an entire host of thousands marching south, leaving only token garrisons behind. Messengers were dispatched in all directions, some carrying news that the Lannister host was returning to King's Landing. Others aimed at ensuring that Tywin's other bannermen would not abandon him. But across the land, ravens spread a darker tidbit. The king had slain his uncle, Tyrion the Imp, scion of House Lannister. Many in the realm took it as confirmation of everything they feared about Joffrey's cruelty. And for House Lannister, it was as if a wedge had been driven into their heart. Tyrion's death had shattered trust within their own ranks. With the father and the son on a collision course, the shape of the war changed in an instant, for no one knew if House Lannister might devour itself before it could finish devouring the rest of Westeros. In the Red Keep, the aftermath of Tyrion's execution settled like a poison. Cersei lurked in her chambers, devoured by dread. She drank more wine than ever before, her nights plagued by nightmares. Images of Tyrion's severed head, eyes open in a final shock, tormented her. She had never loved her dwarf brother, but they had shared the same blood, and she had come to see the value in his cunning. Now she was racked by guilt and fear. She had tried, in a half-hearted way, to oppose Joffrey in the throne room, but she had not done enough. Cersei knew, too, that Tywin would not stand for this. Joffrey might be the king, but Tywin was the patriarch of House Lannister, the true puppet master. If he returned, who would protect Joffrey from Tywin's wrath? And if Joffrey's power was threatened, would he strike against her next? Paranoia gnawed at her. She felt trapped between the unstoppable fury of her father and the unpredictable violence of her son. Increasingly, Joffrey brushed aside her advice, refusing to hold counsel with the small council. The heads of traitors still adorned the walls at the city gates, and he found fresh reasons to add to the grisly collection. A whiff of dissent, a rumor of disrespect, and the sword would come out. The city had turned sullen, fearful, the tension rising like a storm cloud over the spires. Late one night, Cersei was startled by a knock at her door. She had been pacing with a goblet of wine in her hand, the fireplace flickering shadows. At her curt answer, Ser Jaime Lannister stepped in, looking haggard from the road. He had arrived in the city under the cover of darkness, having been freed from Robb Stark's captivity in this alternate timeline by a lesser-known exchange orchestrated by certain cunning lords. Now he stood before his sister, golden hair tangled, eyes shadowed by exhaustion and shock. "Jaime," Cersei breathed, setting down her goblet. He studied her face, noting the lines of worry etched there. "I came as soon as I could. Word reached me. Tyrion is dead." The words sounded strange on Jaime's tongue, as if he couldn't quite believe them. "And by Joffrey's order." Cersei nodded, eyes brimming with tears she was too proud to shed. "My son is out of control. He said Tyrion was a traitor. He gave him no chance to speak." Her voice dropped to a hoarse whisper. "I stood by, Jaime. I was powerless." Jaime exhaled. "Powerless? You're the Queen Regent." "I am nothing to Joffrey's madness," she retorted. "He's not a child I can discipline. He's a king who thinks he can do as he pleases." Jaime's face hardened. "Where is he now? In his chambers or tormenting Sansa Stark?" "I can hardly keep track," Cersei said bitterly. "The entire city trembles. And father, he is on his way. The gold cloaks speak of little else. The Lannister host is coming." Jaime stared at the flickering flames. "Then war within the house is inevitable." Cersei's lip trembled. "We cannot allow that to happen. We must find a way to contain Joffrey before father arrives, or else the city might be drowned in our family's blood." She stepped closer to Jaime, her voice hushed and desperate. "He still listens to you sometimes. You're his father, even if he doesn't know it openly. He admires your skill, your legend as a knight. Maybe you can talk sense into him." A mirthless laugh escaped Jaime. "Sense? That boy lost sense long ago, and it is my fault, in part, for never being the father he truly needed. But for the realm's sake, I will try." His gaze slid to the wine. "Though I might need a drink first." Cersei grabbed his hand. "Jaime, he murdered Tyrion. In broad daylight. No trial, no chance. If he suspects we stand against him, what do you think he will do to us?" His eyes flickered. "Let him try," he said, though a tremor of uncertainty undercut his bravado. He had only just escaped captivity. He had one hand still bandaged from an injury, but not lost as in the original timeline. Even so, he was not at full strength. Still, a kernel of determination burned in him. "He has grown accustomed to the Kingsguard bowing and scraping. If he tries to kill me, he'll have to fight me himself." They spent the rest of the night whispering in circles, uncertain how to proceed. There was no easy solution. If Joffrey was willing to kill Tyrion, a direct relative, then no one close to him was truly safe. The wine did little to numb the dread. At dawn, Jaime arranged a private audience with Joffrey. The king had chosen to greet him in the small council chamber, though the council itself had been dismissed. Joffrey lounged in the chair at the head of the table, drumming his fingers on the polished wood. A tray of sweetmeats lay before him, barely touched. Sandor Clegane stood behind him, face grim, arms folded. Jaime strode in, ignoring the protest of the gold cloaks at the door, wearing his armor but not helmet. Joffrey regarded him with a predatory grin. "Uncle Jaime," the boy said, "or should I call you father's brother? It's so hard to keep track of the genealogies." Jaime refused to take the bait. "Your Grace," he said, bowing his head just enough to show respect. "I returned as swiftly as I could. You have my gratitude for any part you played in my release." Joffrey said, feigning indifference. "Your captivity was a nuisance. You were better placed here for the war. But it seems you've arrived too late to save the imp." He smirked. "Not that you would have wanted to, surely?" Jaime kept his expression cool. "He was my brother, Your Grace." "Half a brother," Joffrey corrected with a sneer. "But yes, I've rid us all of his treason. Are you here to whimper for him?" A flash of anger glinted in Jaime's eyes, but he suppressed it. "I'm here to understand, Your Grace, why you would kill your own uncle without consulting the Hand, or the Queen Regent, or even me." Joffrey leaned forward. "Do I look like I need permission to remove a traitor's head?" His voice rose. "I am the king, uncle. The only authority that matters is mine." Jaime shifted stance, refusing to break eye contact. "Your father, my Lord Tywin, commands armies that keep this throne secure. He placed you where you are. Are you so certain he'll remain loyal after you've taken your brother's life?" Joffrey's expression darkened. "He will remain loyal because I am king. It's that simple. The rest is talk. I will not be questioned." The hound spoke up quietly. "Boy." "Quiet, dog," Joffrey snapped, though his pale eyes flicked with caution. Sandor had grown bolder in his dismissive attitude, and Joffrey, for all his arrogance, suspected the hound's loyalty was fraying. Jaime's lips tightened. "If I may speak plainly, Your Grace, there is a storm gathering. The realm is outraged. House Stark, House Tully, and now many lords who once might have bent the knee are asking themselves if the Lannisters devour their own. What chance do they have to remain safe under our rule?" Joffrey's gaze flared. He slapped the table, making the tray of sweetmeats jump. "I will rule them through fear if I must. If they question me, they shall face the same punishment. If they resist, I will butcher them." "Then you will be no king at all," Jaime replied in a low voice. "Only a tyrant waiting to be toppled. A wise ruler. Are you calling me unwise?" Joffrey spat. His hand inched toward the dagger at his waist. "You should mind that tongue, or I may slice it out." Jaime took a slow breath. "I am trying to save you, Joffrey. Your father, Lord Tywin, is coming, and he will not be pleased." Joffrey stood abruptly. "I welcome him. He will bend the knee or I will have his head, too. I am not afraid of an old man." Even the hound grimaced at that. Jaime's eyes brimmed with astonishment at the extent of Joffrey's madness. The boy truly believed he could threaten Tywin Lannister, the man who crushed the reigns of Castamere, the man whose name alone sent lords quaking. Jaime forced calm into his tone. "Your Grace, I have fought in wars since I was a boy. I have served the realm my entire life. My father is a formidable man, and if you meet him with disrespect, we will have more than enemies at our gates. We will have civil war." Joffrey's lip curled in distaste. "Then we shall have war," he declared. "Is that all?" Jaime stared at his son-nephew, feeling an ache in his chest. "You do not understand what you are doing." "Enough," Joffrey snapped. "Leave me. I have grown bored of this conversation." Jaime lingered a moment, clenching his fists as a wave of rage and sorrow clashed within him. Then he bowed stiffly and retreated. The hound's eyes flickered to him, communicating a shared frustration. The boy king was unstoppable in his arrogance, it seemed. Outside the chamber, Jaime paused in the corridor, taking a moment to steady himself. Cersei appeared, having waited for him. Her face was hopeful. What did he say? Jaime's expression told her all she needed to know. She turned pale. "Gods be good, we are lost." Jaime put a hand on her shoulder. If father comes with the host, we must try to mediate. If that fails, he hesitated, letting the unspoken possibility hang, that Joffrey might have to be removed from the throne by force. Cersei's voice trembled. That is high treason to even consider. Jaime gave a bitter laugh. Treason seems to be in fashion these days. Cersei was not the only one suffering nightmares. In her cramped bedchamber, Sansa Stark tossed under thin blankets, haunted by images of her father and Tyrion. She was awakened by a gentle knock. Sitting up, she murmured, "Come." Shae, who had slipped into the Red Keep under curious circumstances, stepped in. She had tears in her eyes. "Milady," she said, though the honorific was uncertain, as Sansa was more a prisoner than a lady in these halls. Sansa rubbed her face. "You're Tyrion's friend," she whispered. Shae nodded, biting her lip. I stayed away as he asked, but the word has spread everywhere now. He's gone." Her voice cracked. "He was good to me," Sansa sighed, pressing a hand to her heart. She still did not fully understand the arrangement Tyrion had with Shae, but she knew Shae's grief was real. "I'm sorry. He did not deserve that end." Shae came closer, lowering her voice. "You're not safe here. I have heard the talk from the servants. The king grows more dangerous by the day, and your name is whispered. Some say he will force you to marry him anyway, or harm you to send a message to the north." Sansa's eyes brimmed with tears. "I have nowhere to go," she said. "My mother and brother are in the north. The war." She swallowed a sob. "I can't escape." Shae hesitated, then squeezed Sansa's hand. "We must find a way to survive. We owe it to Tyrion, in a way." Sansa blinked. "To Tyrion? Shae said bitterly. "He tried to shield me. He gave me coins, told me to keep hidden. Said that if Joffrey knew about me, he might use me against Tyrion. Or worse." Her eyes flicked away. "He was always thinking of others in his own way." Sansa felt a strange guilt. She had loathed the Lannisters for her father's death, but Tyrion had never tormented her. In fact, he tried to show her some kindness in a place devoid of it. If there's anything I can do," she offered timidly. Shae managed a sad smile. "Just stay alive, little bird. Don't let them break you." Days bled into weeks as the tension in King's Landing rose. The gold cloaks patrolled the streets in force, stamping out any sign of unrest. Joffrey, on the throne, demanded further executions. Traitors, he called them, though many were mere commoners who had made unlucky jests. The stench of fear suffocated the city. Then, one morning, horns sounded beyond the walls. A rider approached the city, bearing the banner of House Lannister, the golden lion on a crimson field. Soon, more banners followed, and the dusty roads filled with thousands of marching men-at-arms. Tywin Lannister had returned. A hush fell over King's Landing as word spread. The grizzled might of House Lannister was at the gates. Joffrey ordered them opened. He was the king, after all, and Tywin was presumably his loyal subject. But he also must have sensed the confrontation looming. Tywin entered the city at the head of a grand procession. Kevan Lannister to his left, a row of bannermen behind them. The small folk along the streets whispered to one another, some cheering for the arrival of the famed warlord, others watching sullenly from the shadows. The banners flapped in a hot wind, and the sky threatened storms. Within the Red Keep, Cersei tried to prepare Joffrey for the meeting. "Do not provoke him," she warned. "Show him respect. We can talk all of this out calmly." Joffrey sneered. "He will bow to me. I am his king." She bit her tongue, remembering Tyrion's severed head, and how Joffrey's arrogance might lead them all to ruin. Jaime stood near, arms folded, saying little. Even he was uncertain how to contain the explosion that was sure to come. The throne room was arranged for the formal greeting. Lannister soldiers lined the walls. In marched Tywin Lannister, armor polished, cloak of crimson swirling behind him. His face was a rigid mask, but there was a seething fury beneath. Kevan walked by his side, grave. Joffrey awaited on the Iron Throne, flanked by Cersei, Jaime, and the Kingsguard. Lords of the court hovered behind them, curiosity and dread mingling in their faces. The boy king forced a triumphant smile, as though his grandfather's arrival were merely a sign of further consolidation of his power. Tywin halted a dozen paces from the throne, removing his gauntlets one finger at a time in silent ritual. He inclined his head a fraction, an acknowledgement, but not a full bow. "Your Grace," he said, "I have come at your summons." Joffrey's smile flickered. "So you have. I trust the war in the Riverlands is proceeding." Tywin's jaw tightened. "The Riverlands can wait. We have unfinished business here." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Joffrey's eyes narrowed. "What business is that, Lord Tywin?" Tywin did not mince words. "Why did you execute your uncle, Tyrion Lannister?" Silence. Joffrey clenched his fists. He shot a warning glare at his mother, as if to say, "Don't interfere." Then he met Tywin's gaze. He was a traitor. He threatened the throne. Tywin's voice was low, dangerous. And what threat did he pose that warranted an immediate execution? "He sought to undermine me," Joffrey retorted. "Conspired to supplant me with my brother Tommen. I would not stand for it." An exhalation rattled through Tywin's nostrils. "I see." He took a step forward, ignoring the hush that fell. "I name you a fool, Joffrey. Tyrion was my son, and by executing him without trial, you have sown discord in our house." Collective gasp. Joffrey's knuckles went white on the arms of the throne. "You dare insult your king?" Tywin's mouth curled in disdain. "My loyalty to House Lannister is absolute. You wear the crown through our family's machinations. Never forget that. You are king in name, but we are the power that keeps you there." Jaime stiffened, moving half a step closer, unsure if he would need to physically intervene. Cersei watched anxiously. The tension in the room was suffocating. Joffrey stood, chin high, voice shrill. "You go too far. I am king by right of my father, Robert Baratheon. Your father is Jaime Lannister." Tywin spat, uncaring of the taboo. Gasps and shocked murmurs erupted. "Do not cling to that Baratheon lie. The realm whispers it. And if you cannot keep your own house in order, they will come to see you as the abomination they suspect." Cersei went pale as milk. Jaime's heart hammered at his father's blatant statement. Joffrey's face turned a furious scarlet. "How dare you?" the boy king shrieked, his voice cracking. He motioned to the Kingsguard. "Arrest him. Cut him down." The white-cloaked knights hesitated. This was Tywin Lannister they were being told to seize, Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, the man who commanded a massive army. Kevan Lannister glared daggers at them, daring them to make a move. Tywin gave an almost imperceptible tilt of his head, and behind him, his personal guard bristled, hands drifting to sword hilts. A single spark could ignite a bloody confrontation in the throne room. Joffrey realized the precariousness and his eyes darted about. "Are you disobeying your king?" He hissed at the Kingsguard. Ser Meryn Trant cleared his throat. "We do not wish to raise steel in the throne room, your grace." Tywin's gaze flicked to Jaime. Jaime swallowed. He could see no easy resolution. If Joffrey attacked Tywin now, the Lannister host would tear King's Landing apart. Cersei found her voice. "Father," she said carefully, stepping forward, "we have lost too much already." "We," Tywin cut her off with a raised hand. "I will have peace, but I demand that the boy answer for the death of my son. If you have proof that Tyrion was plotting against you, let us see it. Otherwise, this is murder." Joffrey clenched his teeth. He had no such proof. He had only his own paranoia and Cersei's reluctant confession of Tyrion's supposed words. "He threatened me," Joffrey mumbled, less certain. "He said I would lead the realm to ruin." "His words ring true," Tywin said icily. "If you continue on this course, you will indeed lead us to ruin." He paused, letting the weight of his condemnation settle. Then he spun on his heel. "I will retire to my chambers and decide the future of this house." With a gesture to Kevan, he turned and strode out, leaving. the throne room abuzz with shock. Joffrey stood trembling, his nails digging into his palms. The entire court had witnessed Tywin's open defiance. Cersei lingered, torn between father and son, and Jaime's gaze roamed the Kingsguard, who seemed uncertain whom they truly served. For a time, King's Landing was a city under uneasy occupation. Tywin and his soldiers were effectively a second authority alongside Joffrey's gold cloaks and Kingsguard. Cersei found herself playing mediator, but Joffrey became more sullen and erratic, and Tywin's patience wore thin. Within a fortnight, it reached a breaking point. Joffrey began ordering arrests of Tywin's bannermen in the city, claiming they were disloyal. He tried to have Kevan Lannister apprehended, but Kevan's guards beat the gold cloaks back. Blood was shed in the streets. The tension roiled to fever pitch, violence or negotiation was imminent. Cersei, Jaime, and a handful of advisors convened in the Queen's solar. The smell of burning pitch wafted from the torches. Cersei paced while Jaime stood by the window, arms folded. Varys lingered in a corner, face unreadable. Peter Baelish was absent, having vanished to manage his own intrigues. "We cannot let Joffrey and father come to arms," Cersei said in a hushed, trembling tone. "It will tear House Lannister apart. The Tyrells, the Martells, the Baratheons, Stannis, Renly, the Northmen. Everyone will pounce at our moment of weakness." Jaime nodded grimly. "I've tried reasoning with him, but he won't listen. He's still determined to prove he is the rightful, unquestioned king. He sees any attempt to rein him in as betrayal." Varys cleared his throat gently. "My queen, the realm stands upon a precipice. Already the people whisper that the Lannisters are fracturing. Some in the city say we might see open war in the streets, with thousands of small folk caught in the crossfire." Cersei rubbed her brow. "We must have a solution. Could we—" Her voice faltered. "Could we remove Joffrey from the throne for now?" She looked at Jaime, half pleading. "If he is unfit." Jaime arched a brow. "You suggest dethroning your own son?" She swallowed, tears gathering. "He's become a monster. Father was right. Cannot let him drag us all down. Tommen might be a gentler king, more easily guided. The realm might accept it, but it would be dangerous." Varys pursed his lips. "Dangerous indeed. Removing a crowned king is not a trivial matter, even if many would secretly rejoice. The boy has the loyalty of certain guards, certain lords. It would require a swift and decisive blow. And how would Tywin react?" Cersei closed her eyes. "Father might actually welcome it, though it would shame the house to expose Joffrey as unfit. But better that than all-out war." Jaime exhaled. "We risk a bloodbath whichever route we take. If Joffrey suspects we mean to remove him, he'll lash out." Varys's gaze flicked between them. "His cruelty knows little restraint. But if he remains on the throne, your father might decide to remove him by force. That will certainly be a bloodbath." Cersei shivered, recalling the memory of Tyrion's severed head. "I never thought it would come to this. I never wanted—" She broke off, remembering that all this was partly her doing. She had stoked the lie of Joffrey's Baratheon paternity, manipulated the court, let Joffrey's cruelty fester. Now the harvest was bitter. They talked in circles until dawn, but no plan emerged. Every option reeked of treachery. To kill or imprison Joffrey was regicide. To let him continue was to risk civil war. Cersei hovered on the brink of despair. A week later, the final explosion came. Joffrey, in a fit of rage, attempted to have Tywin arrested in his solar. Several of Joffrey's Kingsguard, Ser Marentrant, Ser Osmond Kettleblack, burst into Tywin's rooms with drawn swords, only to be met by Tywin's own guards. Steel clashed on marble. Screams rang out. 2 of Tywin's men fell, but the Kingsguard were overpowered by sheer numbers. Ser Maren took a pike to the thigh and collapsed, shrieking. Tywin, stepping over the dying bodies, stormed out into the corridor, yelling commands. "Arrest the king's men. Seize the gold cloaks. Let no one pass." Within minutes, the Red Keep was a war zone. Lannister men loyal to Tywin fought gold cloaks loyal to Joffrey. Servants fled, screaming. Fires broke out in a corridor near the Tower of the Hand. Archers took positions in the upper galleries, picking off anyone wearing the wrong sigil. Cersei, in her chambers, heard the uproar and rushed into the corridors, flanked by 2 guards. She was nearly cut down by a panicked group of gold cloaks who fled a band of Tywin's soldiers. Jaime found her just in time, parrying a wild slash meant for her. "This is madness," Cersei wept, clutching Jaime's arm. "It's all unraveling. We must get you somewhere safe," Jaime barked. "Perhaps we can still contain this." They hurried through the smoky hallways. Bodies littered the floor, men groaning in pain. At one turn, they saw the Hound hacking down a pair of Lannister men. Sandor recognized Jaime but said nothing, blood running down the side of his face. He moved on in search of more foes. In the heart of the Red Keep, near the throne room, Tywin's men took positions, forming a barrier. Joffrey's retinue assembled on the other side, the Boy King hollering orders to kill the traitors. Arrows flew, swords clashed. Wails filled the air. Tywin himself strode out, resplendent in gold and crimson armor, a long sword in hand. "Lay down your arms," he commanded the gold cloaks. "This is done. The king stands accused of murder and treason." Joffrey stepped forward into the melee, wearing a breastplate etched with lions, face contorted. "You stand accused, old man," he screamed. "You betray your king. I am your rightful ruler." He slashed at a soldier in his way, a savage blow. The soldier fell, gurgling. Tywin narrowed his eyes, pushing forward. Kevan was at his side, along with a knot of Lannister knights. Joffrey was guarded by a scattering of Kingsguard. The fight reignited. Steel battered steel, echoes ringing off the vaulted ceilings. Tywin was unstoppable, an experienced warrior even in his later years, and Kevan fought with stoic resolve. The Kingsguard, outnumbered, struggled to maintain formation around Joffrey. Amid the swirl of chaos, Jaime rushed in from a side corridor with Cersei. He saw Tywin's men close on Joffrey and tried to reach them before the worst happened. "Father," he called. "Wait!" Joffrey spotted Jaime and shrieked, "Help me kill him, Uncle Jaime!" Jaime froze, torn between father and son. The memory of Tyrion's death roared in his mind. He gripped his sword, the clangor of battle reverberating. For all his flaws, Jaime had never desired patricide or filicide. He wanted a resolution, but the moment offered no time for reasoned argument. Tywin and Kevan advanced. The Kingsguard parted, unsteady. Joffrey swung wildly, slashing at Kevan, who dodged and countered. Their blades rang. The Boy King's stance was that of a half-trained squire, relying on rage more than skill. Kevan disarmed him with a twist. Joffrey stumbled backward, screaming for help. Tywin seized the moment, pointing his sword at Joffrey's throat. "Yield," he snarled. "End this madness." Joffrey spat at him. "I'd sooner die." Then, with a sudden motion, the Boy King lunged for a discarded dagger on the floor. Tywin reacted instantly, driving his blade through Joffrey's chest. A stunned hush fell, broken only by the moans of the wounded. Joffrey stared at Tywin, mouth agape in disbelief. Blood bubbled at his lips as he sank to his knees. Cersei screamed, a raw, harrowing wail, and flew toward them, but Jaime caught her, preventing her from throwing herself onto the swords. Tywin yanked his blade out, eyes cold, as Joffrey collapsed onto the marble floor. The Boy King twitched, hands scrabbling at the wound, and then lay still in a spreading pool of blood. His last expression was one of stunned outrage. Cersei fell to her knees, sobbing hysterically. Jaime stood there, sword limp at his side, stunned. The Kingsguard dropped their blades, no longer certain whom they served. Tywin stepped back, breathing hard, a flicker of regret crossing his face. Then he raised his sword high. "The reign of Joffrey Baratheon is at an end," he declared in a voice that resonated through the ruined throne room. "Henceforth, Tommen Baratheon shall be king." Let all who are loyal to House Lannister stand down. The conflict is over. The silence stretched, no one daring to speak. Then, haltingly, some of the gold cloaks knelt. The Lannister men lowered their weapons. The throne room's floors were slick with blood, the stench of death thick in the air. Cersei rocked over Joffrey's body, tears painting her cheeks. Jaime approached, a trembling hand on her shoulder, as if to comfort her, though he was numb inside. Tywin turned away, closing his eyes briefly, perhaps in a moment of rare anguish for the child he had just slain, his own grandson. In the days that followed, the Red Keep was a mausoleum of regret. With Joffrey's body prepared for burial, the city braced itself for further turmoil. Cersei stayed locked in her chambers, inconsolable. Tywin took control as regent for Tommen, who was only 8 years old. Kevan urged calm, helping to rebuild alliances. Jaime oversaw the restoration of order among the gold cloaks. But nothing could erase the memory of that day. The monstrous reign of Joffrey Baratheon had ended, but the cost was incalculable. Tyrion's life, countless soldiers in the Red Keep's corridors, and the soul of House Lannister itself. The small folk whispered that the Lannisters devoured their own. The once fearsome name was tarnished by the spectacle of father slaying grandson, nephew slaying uncle. When the war against the Starks resumed, House Lannister found fewer allies. The Tyrells were cool in their support. The Stormlands were divided between Stannis and Renly. The Riverlords fought back with renewed fury. Even the Freys seemed hesitant, suspicious that the Lannisters could not keep their own house in order. Within King's Landing, Sansa Stark found herself quietly relieved that Joffrey was gone, though her father's death still haunted her and her position remained precarious. She prayed often in the Sept, uncertain if Tommen would bring a gentler reign. She only knew that the worst monster in her nightmares was no more. Even so, she felt a pang of sorrow for the tragedy that had befallen the Lannisters and for Tyrion, who had once treated her with small mercies. One afternoon, Cersei summoned Jaime to her chambers. He found her by the window, pale and wan, gazing out at the city. She wore a black gown of mourning, her hair loose around her shoulders. When he entered, she turned, eyes rimmed with red. "Jaime," she said, voice hollow. I wanted to speak to you before Father summons the council again." He approached warily. The room smelled of stale wine. "How are you? How do you think I am?" she replied, a hint of the old acid in her tone. Then she sighed. "I have lost Joffrey, my firstborn. Tommen is on the throne, but he is only a child. My daughter Myrcella is far away in Dorne. Tyrion is dead. Our house is in ruins." Jaime put a hand on the windowsill. "Father has seized control of the realm. He will place Tommen on the throne properly, with Margaery Tyrell as queen, if the Tyrells consent. The realm needs stability." Cersei barked a painful laugh. "Stability? Do you think the people will ever forget that we butchered each other? That we killed Tyrion and Joffrey ourselves?" She closed her eyes, shuddering. "We are cursed, Jaime, mad with pride and ambition, and all for what? So we could wear the crowns and cloaks and feel powerful." Jaime lowered his gaze. "I never wanted the throne. I wanted..." He hesitated. "I wanted to be free of it all, but it is too late." Cersei studied him. "You have changed. Ever since you returned from captivity, I hardly recognize you." He shrugged. "War changes men." His voice lowered. "Sister, we have paid a terrible price. Perhaps the best we can do now is hold what remains of our family together, for Tommen's sake." She nodded vaguely, though a tear slipped from her eye. "I loved Joffrey," she said. "Despite everything, I can't forget the little boy he was, the child who needed me, who laughed when I bounced him on my knee. But that boy was gone long before Father's sword took him. We made him into a monster." She rubbed her arms as if chilled. "And now we have Myrcella in Dorne. Who knows if they will keep her safe or use her as a pawn? We have Tommen, so young, forced to be a king in a realm that despises us." Jaime moved closer, tentatively putting an arm around her shoulders. She let him, leaning her head against his chest. They stood in silence, two broken halves of a golden dream, as the wind whispered through the open window. Time wore on, and Tommen was crowned in a subdued ceremony. The crowds lined the streets, but the mood was muted compared to the lavish celebrations of Joffrey's reign. House Tyrell sent Margaery with a modest entourage to betroth the boy king. Margaery arrived in black lace, still feigning mourning for Joffrey, though privately many suspected she was relieved to be free of that match. Tywin presided over the wedding plans, forging a careful alliance with the Tyrells, who recognized an opportunity to become the real power behind the throne of a child king. Tywin's efforts shifted to pacifying the Riverlands, making overtures to House Frey, and managing the continued threat of Robb Stark's forces. The realm was battered, with men dying daily. In the north, the news of Tyrion's execution and Joffrey's death stirred conflicting emotions. Robb Stark recognized that the Lannisters were weakened by infighting, but also realized that Tywin was as ruthless as ever. If anything, the old lion was more dangerous now that he had no illusions about family unity. The war ground on. In King's Landing, the small folk whispered that the madness of the Lannisters was a curse akin to the Targaryen madness. Heads still decorated spikes on the city walls, including Tyrion's. Tywin had ordered it removed, but the memory lingered like a festering wound, reminding all of the brutality that had consumed the capital. A hush enveloped the Red Keep's halls, a hush of tension and fear and regret. Servants tiptoed, avoiding any misstep that might draw attention. Whispers of the Queen Regent's grief, the King's youth, and the Hand's iron rule spread through the keep. House Lannister was not what it had been. The famed unity and wealth that once frightened the realm was now overshadowed by the savage betrayal in its own ranks. The death of Tyrion had severed the cunning heart, the death of Joffrey had shattered the illusions of invincibility, and Tywin's kinslaying deed would never be forgotten by his enemies. Some said the rains of Castamere would echo forever as a dirge for the house that consumed itself. And so the Iron Throne remained, sharp and cold, a seat of power that devoured all who sought to cling to it too fiercely. As the sun set over King's Landing on another day of tension, ravens lifted into a crimson sky, bearing tidings of war, of alliances made and broken, of a kingdom in perpetual strife. In the end, the question lingered. Had House Lannister truly emerged victorious, or had it torn itself apart? With Tyrion's head on a spike and Joffrey's blood staining the throne room floor, the answer seemed clear to those who dared speak it. House Lannister was a hollow shell of its former might, forced to wield fear in place of loyalty. Tywin's presence kept the realm from spiraling further, but even he, for all his iron will, could not erase the memories etched in blood. They said that on quiet nights, one could hear ghosts in the Red Keep. Ned Stark's final plea echoing from the battlements, Tyrion Lannister's mocking laughter in a dim corridor, and the shrill cry of King Joffrey as he breathed his last. Cersei would awaken in her bed, heart pounding, tears on her cheeks, the regrets of 1,000 choices weighing on her chest. Jaime stood sentinel by Tommen's side, uneasy in the hush, remembering the boy he had helped bring into the world and helped lead to his death. And far away, across the Seven Kingdoms, the wolves of the north howled for vengeance. The roses of Highgarden whispered of ambition. The sands of Dorne glistened with quiet menace, and the Stormlords weighed their claims anew. Over it all, the crows circled, cawing for carrion. The Lannisters might still have gold, but gold had done them little good when their own sword had fallen on their kin. Thus ended the reign of Joffrey Baratheon, in a reign of blood, and thus House Lannister stood, divided and haunted, as the War of the Five Kings dragged on. Winter loomed, and with it came the inexorable truth. No crown could outshine the bleak reality of a house that had devoured itself from within. The shadow of Tyrion Lannister lingered, a reminder that once, there had been a chance for guile and wit to steer the realm away from madness. But that chance lay cold on the battlements, a silent skull whose grin mocked the living. In the nights that followed, Cersei sat alone in her chambers, the last candle guttering. She felt the walls of the Red Keep closing in around her, a trap of her own making. She remembered Tyrion's sardonic quips, how he had tried to warn them all that Joffrey was no mere boy. She remembered the bright, vicious eyes of her son as he gloated over Ned Stark's death. She remembered the fear in Joffrey's final moments before Tywin's blade. Then she would press her knuckles against her mouth, trying not to scream. The hush of the keep lay heavy and final, a hush that declared the monstrous truth. House Lannister, though still standing, had shattered itself far more effectively than any enemy army could. The lion's roar had turned into a wounded snarl, echoing in hollow halls, as the realm looked on and saw a house undone by its own pride, cruelty, and the dark illusions of power. Yet the wheel of war kept turning, caring little for Lannister grief. Armies marched, ravens flew, alliances formed and broke like waves upon the shore, and the ghostly hush endured, steeped in the memory of bloodshed. If ever the Lannisters rose to true might again, it would be a different house altogether, for the tragedy of Tyrion and Joffrey could never be undone. All that remained was the relentless onward march of fate, sweeping them into a dark and uncertain future, where the echoes of that singular, fatal moment in the throne room would shadow their steps for generations to come. The hush in the Red Keep lingered long after Joffrey's blood had dried on the throne room floor, though the corridors bustled again with servants sweeping up shards of shattered armor and scorched debris from that dreadful day. An uneasy quiet clung to the walls, like a thin film of grime that no amount of effort could wash away. Every guard, courtier, and council member felt the tension snaking through the halls, and a single misstep, even a thoughtless whisper, could rouse the anger of Lord Tywin Lannister. He was not a man who tolerated the faintest whiff of insubordination, especially now, as he wrested back control of a house that had nearly devoured itself. In the days that followed King Joffrey's death, Tywin made swift and brutal changes. He installed Tommen Baratheon, 8 years old, wide-eyed, and trembling on the Iron Throne. The boy had wept softly for his brother at first, but after the initial shock, Tommen seemed numb, perhaps too young to fully grasp that Joffrey's reign was over and that he himself would now be king of the Undulls and the First Men. Tywin declared himself regent for King Tommen, naming Kevan Lannister as Master of Laws and effectively sidelining Cersei, who had locked herself away in her chambers since the killing. Jaime, stuck in the middle, divided his time between commanding the city's defenses, what remained of the Gold Cloaks after their clash with Tywin's men, and trying to coax Cersei out of her numb, wine-clouded state. Meanwhile, the body of Tyrion Lannister, once flung upon the walls as a traitor's warning, was quietly removed from its pike at Tywin's order. Rumor held that Tywin had demanded the head be cleansed, the remains wrapped in red silk, and sent back to Casterly Rock for a discreet burial. Yet the damage was done. The city had beheld the hideous sight of the imp's severed head, alongside the rotting heads of other so-called traitors. Tyrion's death was no rumor. His execution under Joffrey's command had turned King's Landing into an uproar of whispered fear. Many small folk, who had once found Tyrion cunning and even affable, could scarcely believe he had died at his own sister's son's order. And they believed it even less that Tywin Lannister's sword, not long thereafter, had ended that very king's life. Still, while the gossip churned in taverns and alleyways, the greatest shock was that Tywin Lannister, the dread Lion of the West, had deemed it necessary to kill his own grandson. Some whispered that it was the cost of containing a monster. Others insisted that Joffrey had proven his bastard parentage beyond all doubt by turning on the family who made him king. Either way, the realm, already battered by war, found itself staggering under the weight of yet more chaos. For many, the War of the Five Kings was no longer purely a question of which claimant would wear the crown. It was a question of whether the Lannisters might collapse from within. In a city thrumming with uncertainty, no one felt entirely safe. The Gold Cloaks had been purged of those deemed loyal to Joffrey's madness. The new officers were older, veterans from Tywin's armies. Lannister men patrolled the walls, checking the gates, ensuring no infiltration from rivals. The small council was a shadow of its former self. Varys, his face unreadable as always, drifted in and out of sessions but offered little. Peter Baelish slipped away soon after Joffrey's death on a convenient mission to the Vale. Some suspected he was quietly insulating himself from the fallout in King's Landing. Ser Meryn Trant lay recovering in a makeshift infirmary, having had a pike through his thigh during the confrontation. Ser Boros Blunt had fled the city altogether. Only a few Kingsguard remained, notably Ser Osmond Kettleblack, but even they seemed more bodyguards of Tywin's regime than sworn protectors of a child king. Tommen Baratheon was crowned in a somber ceremony, far smaller and simpler than his brothers had been. The High Septon, though trembling with age and anxiety, placed the crown lightly upon Tommen's fair head before a handful of onlookers. There were no boisterous feasts, no grand pageants, only a single day of minimal festivities. The people were too frightened to cheer. In the courtyard, a sprinkling of watchers offered quiet applause as the new king was led inside. The most fervent onlookers were the silent ones who measured what Tywin might do next. Cersei was present but said little. Draped in black, she kept her face veiled, as if the sight of King's Landing reviled her. Tywin remained stone-faced throughout the crowning, making no concession to ceremony beyond what was strictly required. By his side, his brother Kevan bowed his head gravely, taking his cues from Tywin's every shift in expression. Jaime stood near Tommen, a gilded sentinel in his clean, well-polished armor, though the lines of strain on his face betrayed that he wished himself anywhere else. In the front row, Sansa Stark watched with a mixture of awe and dread, her hands clasped so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She was bound to the Lannisters' fate, still a hostage and still uncertain if she would ever escape. When the ceremony ended, and the new king was guided back to the Red Keep, Tommen's eyes flicked around, as if hoping to catch some friendly face. He found none. He caught a glimpse of his mother, but Cersei's gaze had drifted, her green eyes lost to sorrow. The boy wanted to run to her, to cling to her skirts the way he had done when he was little, but Tywin's hand on his shoulder steered him away, and so they disappeared into the gloom of the keep. That same evening, as torches flickered in the hallways, Lord Tywin summoned a meeting of the small council. The setting was the newly reconstituted council chamber. Joffrey had once used it sporadically, but the real decisions had been made in chaotic gatherings. Now, Tywin meant to restore the gravity of the council. He seated himself at the head of the polished oak table. Around him were Kevan Lannister, Pycelle, Varys, and a handful of other lesser functionaries. Cersei was conspicuously absent, still locked away. Jaime stood guard by the door, though he was no member of the council officially. Tywin wasted little time. "The realm requires stability," he said in a voice that carried the weight of mountains. "We have a war in the Riverlands, a rebellion in the north, and a precarious alliance with the Tyrells. Now is the time to consolidate." His gaze swept the men assembled. Each one felt the intensity of that stare. Varys, hands tucked in his voluminous sleeves, offered a small bow. "My lord, the Tyrells grow cautious. They fear the events in King's Landing have weakened our position or perhaps left us too unpredictable to rely upon." "Then we must reassure them," Tywin replied curtly. "Tommen shall marry Margaery Tyrell. The boy is young, but it matters not. The betrothal will ensure the Tyrell armies and gold remain on our side." Grand Maester Pycelle leaned forward, stroking his beard. "Yes, my lord. The Tyrells have long desired greater influence in court. No doubt they will see advantage in guiding a child king." Tywin inclined his head in agreement. "It is a necessity, not an indulgence. The Tyrell alliance is vital to preventing a war on multiple fronts. Between the Starks, the Tullis, and any who might rally behind Stannis Baratheon's call, we need the Reach's support. Whatever it takes, we will ensure Margaery Tyrell's presence here in King's Landing." Kevan cleared his throat. "And what of the North, brother? Robb Stark remains a threat. They name him king in the North. With Joffrey gone, we cannot rely on intimidation alone to quell them." Tywin's eyes glinted with cold anger. "There can be no peace with the Starks while they claim my grandson's murder gave them cause for war. They have already declared it. Besides, that boy led armies to victory at Whispering Wood and the camps. We cannot allow him to gather more momentum. We will quell him by whatever means are necessary." A hush settled. Even mention of Robb Stark carried an edge. Tywin pressed his lips into a thin line, apparently remembering that Tyrion's brilliance might have helped them in dealing with the boy wolf. But Tyrion was gone. He exhaled, sliding any trace of grief behind a disciplined mask. We shall shift our forces accordingly. I must depart King's Landing again soon. Once Tommen's rule is firmly established, I will return to the field with the necessary men. Kevin will remain to oversee administration. Jaime. He glanced at his elder son, who stood near the door. Jaime will remain at the king's side. Jaime inclined his head. As you command. Varys shuffled his feet. And what of the wedding details, my lord? If we can present a stable front, perhaps we may coax Mace Tyrell to expedite the marriage. Tywin waved a dismissive hand. Yes, the wedding will be arranged quickly. No expense spared if it must be so. The Tyrells crave pageantry. Let them have it. But the pomp will mask the fact that we are running short on time. He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. See it done. Then, Kevin, assemble a fresh retinue of knights who can escort me back to the field. I trust you will keep the city in order. Root out any remnants of Joffrey's old guard who might bear resentment. Of course, my lord. Thus the council concluded, each man rising and bowing. Varys lingered a moment, as though wishing to say more, but Tywin rose abruptly, leaving no room for further discussion. Jaime opened the door for his father, and they departed into the corridor. News of the upcoming royal betrothal spread quickly through King's Landing. It brought some excitement to the weary small folk who had grown accustomed to gloom and bloodshed. Perhaps a wedding would signify a turning point, the start of new fortunes. Bread might become cheaper, wars might recede, and the city might be able to breathe again. But behind the scenes, tension crackled. The memory of Tyrion's execution and Joffrey's bloody end felt too recent, too raw. Many wondered if Tommen might meet a similar fate should he displease Lord Tywin. Some speculated that Tywin might simply rule indefinitely as regent, with Tommen a figurehead. Others whispered that if the Tyrells saw weakness, they might attempt to seize the throne for themselves. In the markets and in back-alley taverns, the darkest rumor was that House Lannister had cursed itself for kinslaying and would be consumed by vengeful ghosts. The common folk might have believed in curses more readily than the lords at court, but those lords, in their own quiet hours, had begun to wonder the same. Even the court festivities lacked their old spark. Minstrels sang soft ballads instead of rousing anthems. Fire-eaters and jugglers were seldom invited to the Red Keep. Feasts were subdued affairs. Wine still flowed, but the laughter around the tables was measured and forced. No one wished to draw Tywin's disapproval. In the midst of this fragile calm, Sansa Stark languished. She remained a prisoner of courtesy and elaborate gowns, frequently summoned to sit quietly in the queen's apartments. Apartments still referred to as Cersei's, even though the queen regent seemed to have little will left to run them. Sansa would stand by the windows, her eyes tracing the distant silhouette of the sea, longing for home. She thought often of her brother, Robb, who had marched south to free their father only to arrive too late. She felt a pang of grief for Tyrion, odd though that was. He had been the only Lannister to show her kindness since her captivity. In a twisted way, she mourned him, though she dared not speak it aloud. One late afternoon, Sansa was in the corridor near Cersei's solar, waiting on a stool while a seamstress fussed with the fit of her gown. The hush of the keep was heavy. Suddenly, the door opened, and Ser Jaime Lannister stepped out, looking grim. He paused when he saw her. "My Lady Stark," he said, not unkindly. He motioned for the seamstress to step aside. "A word with you." Sansa stood, smoothing her skirts with nervous hands. The seamstress bobbed a quick curtsy and scurried away. In the corridor's torchlight, Jaime's green eyes flicked over Sansa's face. She was taller than she had been when she first arrived in King's Landing, but she remained delicate, with a pallor to her cheeks that betrayed constant worry. "What can I do for you, Ser Jaime?" she asked softly. He glanced back at the closed solar door. "You were Joffrey's betrothed once. You are still a guest, albeit a hostage, of House Lannister. I came to see if you have all that you need." There was a dryness to his tone, as if the question was half jest, but not entirely. Sansa dipped her head. I have food and a roof, Ser Jaime. That is enough. His jaw tightened slightly. And you bear no illusions about being able to leave? Her eyes fell to the stone floor. My brother is at war with your house. If you released me, you would be giving away a valuable hostage. I know that. Jaime exhaled. Tommen is king now. Things have changed. Father might see benefit in a peace. Perhaps, in time, you could be exchanged for other hostages, or as part of a truce. He broke off, seeing the flicker of desperate hope cross Sansa's face. In truth, an exchange seemed unlikely unless the North gave some major concession. Tywin Lannister rarely did anything for sentiment's sake, and Sansa's release would be a piece of diplomacy he would only give if it secured him a great advantage. I only mean, Jaime continued in a quieter voice, that you should not lose all hope. Sometimes the tides of war shift, and you deserve better than to rot in these halls. My condolences for your father. Sansa's lips pressed together. She remembered how, after Ned Stark had died, Joffrey forced her to look upon her father's head. Even now, the memory of Joffrey's cruelty made her shudder. But Joffrey himself was gone, cut down by Tywin's sword, in a spectacle no less horrifying. She was surrounded by death, no matter where she looked. And yet, Jaime's expression carried a tinge of genuine sympathy. She forced a small courtesy smile. Thank you, Ser Jaime. He gave a curt nod, then turned and strode away. Sansa watched him go, uncertain what to think. The Lannisters had slain her father's men, her father's bannerlords. They had destroyed her family's hopes for peace. Yet not all of them seemed entirely monstrous. Tyrion had shown her a sliver of kindness, and now Jaime, though certainly proud and dangerous, displayed an odd sense of regret. Could it be that House Lannister was truly fracturing from within? She mulled over the question as the seamstress returned and resumed fussing, and she realized that she might never truly understand the Lannisters. They were complicated, entangled in pride, love, vengeance, and the illusions of power. Days turned to weeks, and the routine of King's Landing found new rhythms. Each morning, Tommen sat upon the Iron Throne for an hour or two of petitioners, though the real decisions were made by Tywin in the council chamber. The watch in the city was doubled. The influx of refugees from the war-torn Riverlands slowed now that Tywin's troops were stationed at the city gates to keep order. Occasionally, the silence was interrupted by rumors of Stannis Baratheon's new fleet or the possibility of a northern alliance with the Iron Islands, but much of the swirl of politics was overshadowed by the hushed gloom that had seized the capital. One bright, unseasonably warm afternoon, a dispatch arrived from Mace Tyrell at Highgarden. The Tyrells agreed to a swift betrothal between Margaery and Tommen, with the wedding to occur in King's Landing. Tywin read the letter carefully, a faint smirk crossing his lips as he sat at his desk. The Tyrells, it seemed, smelled opportunity. With Joffrey dead and Tommen so young, they would likely try to shape the Boy King's policies, shape them to benefit the Reach. Tywin, however, intended to ensure that the shaping went both ways. Margaery Tyrell, for all her rumored wit and grace, would not rule unchecked. Tywin would see to that. But first, the old lion had to reassert Lannister supremacy beyond the walls. He summoned Kevan once more to the council chamber, along with the half-dozen knights who would form the core of his retinue. I ride for Harrenhal in 3 days, Tywin declared, scanning the knights with a measured gaze. The Riverlands remain key. The boy Robb Stark still commands the loyalty of House Tully, and so far, they have not yielded. Our advantage is that the Freys and Boltons have turned against him, partially, but that arrangement is delicate and may require management. Kevan, you will remain here to finalize the betrothal details and ensure the city remains stable. Kevan bowed. You have my word. Jaime, who had been standing aside, spoke quietly. Should I accompany you, father? Tywin shook his head. No, you stay in King's Landing at Tommen's side. Protect him, and keep Cersei in check. She is not to meddle with council business behind my back. Jaime let out a short breath. He understood well enough. After losing Tyrion, Tywin would not risk Jaime on a battlefield, nor would he allow Cersei free rein. As you say, when the meeting ended, the knights dispersed, and Tywin left to speak with the quartermasters, ensuring that supply wagons were prepared. Jaime lingered to exchange a glance with Kevan, who wore a furrowed brow. The younger Lannister recognized the tension in his uncle's posture. "Uncle, do you fear father's temper has worsened since Tyrion's death?" Jaime asked, trying to keep his voice low. Kevan grimaced. "I have never known your father to act rashly, but we have all suffered in different ways. He has lost a child, no matter his feelings for Tyrion. That loss must weigh on him. And then he was forced to kill Joffrey. These are not small matters. He has never been so personally entangled in the violence. War is one thing, kinslaying is another." Jaime nodded, pressing his lips together. "Yet he intends to carry on. He may be more dangerous than ever. A wounded lion is often at its most ferocious." Kevan did not dispute that. "I only hope we can end this war soon, for everyone's sake." That evening, the sun dipped low, painting the sky in pale gold. Jaime found himself alone for a rare moment of reflection. He walked through the Red Keep's gardens, the same place where Sansa Stark had once strolled, dreaming of chivalrous knights and fairy tale weddings. The flowers, scorched by late summer heat and neglected by frightened gardeners, drooped sadly. Jaime stopped near a stone bench, removed a glove, and ran his fingers over a wilted rose. Some petals fell away at his touch, drifting to the ground. His mind returned to Tyrion. How many times had he rebuked Tyrion for being a drunkard, a whoremonger, a cynic? Yet Tyrion's words of caution had often proven wise. He pictured his brother's crooked smile, the sardonic wit that had shielded him from constant scorn. And now Tyrion was gone, executed by a cruel boy-king whose own life ended soon after. Jaime felt no love for Joffrey, had never truly felt that paternal spark, even though he was the boy's biological father, but he could not deny that Joffrey's death haunted him. He had stood there, sword in hand, when Tywin delivered the fatal blow. Jaime had done nothing to stop it. He had allowed it. Had it been necessary? Likely. Had it been just? Who could say? A voice startled him from behind. "Sir Jaime?" came a timid, measured tone. He turned to see Sansa Stark approaching tentatively. Her auburn hair caught the last rays of sunlight, and her expression was a mix of curiosity and apprehension. "My lady," he said, inclining his head. "I am sorry to intrude," she said quietly. The guard said I might walk here for a few minutes if I stayed within sight." Jaime glanced over and saw 2 gold cloaks lingering by an archway, keeping watch. He shrugged. "You've a right to some air, I suppose." Sansa hesitated, then ventured closer. "May I sit?" He moved aside on the bench. "Of course." She lowered herself onto the stone, folding her hands in her lap. For a moment they sat in silence. He watched her out of the corner of his eye, noticing that she seemed thinner, as if stress had devoured the softness of her childhood. The last year had been cruel. She had seen her father beheaded, been humiliated by Joffrey, lost her chance at rescue when the city's gates closed, and now she was caught in the swirl of Lannister tragedy. At length Sansa spoke. "My mother used to tell me about the Red Keep's gardens when I was a little girl. She said they were famed for their beauty, that the Queen's ladies would walk among rose bushes so vibrant you could smell them across the yard." Jaime let out a faint chuckle. "That might have been some time ago. The war has not been kind to anyone." He picked off a dead petal. "Nor has the last king." Sansa turned her gaze to him, a question in her eyes. "Is it truly over? The horror that King Joffrey brought? Is it gone now?" She paused, voice trembling slightly. "Or do I have to fear something worse?" Jaime set the petal aside. "Worse than Joffrey? That is a tall order. But war is war, and the city is not at peace, not truly. My father, Lord Tywin, rules as regent, and he tolerates little defiance. The Tyrells will want their share of power. Your brother, Robb Stark, still threatens from the north." He met her gaze. Peace may be a long time coming. Her eyes shone, but she fought back tears. I only wish to go home, or at least to see my mother and brother again. Jaime considered that, inhaling the faint floral scent that lingered among the wilted blooms. Tommen could decide to grant you leave to return north, if the war ends. But he is a child, and it is truly my father who would decide. As a hostage, you remain valuable to him in negotiations. She nodded, her slender neck stiff with tension. I understand. She paused, then ventured. Are you truly so loyal to your father that you would keep me here indefinitely, even if you feel it's wrong? He stiffened. She had spoken with an unexpected boldness. He turned away, looking at a statue of a rearing lion half hidden by ivy. Did he think it was right or wrong to keep a young girl as a hostage? Duty and honor were seldom aligned in King's Landing. In his Kingsguard role, once sworn to King Aerys, he had done unspeakable things in the name of duty, culminating in the Mad King's murder. Now he was sworn to protect Tommen, but he also wore Lannister colors in spirit, if not in name. And Tywin had made it clear. Sansa Stark was not to leave until it served the house's interests. After a moment, Jaime stood. I think that you and I both do as we must, not always as we wish. This is King's Landing. Here, no one is entirely free. He walked away, leaving Sansa alone on the bench, her thoughts drifting to her father's face, Tyrion's final day, and the fleeting dream that perhaps, someday, this place of horrors would fade behind her. While King's Landing wrestled with internal shadows, news rippled across the 7 kingdoms that the boy King Joffrey was dead, replaced by his younger brother, Tommen. For many lords, the transition hardly changed the war's momentum. The North had still declared independence, the Riverlands still smoldered under Lannister raids, Stannis and Renly Baratheon each claimed the Iron Throne in their own corners of the realm, and the Ironborn ravaged the western coasts. But the nature of House Lannister had changed. No longer was it a single, united front led by a cruel king. Instead, it was Tywin Lannister's personal regime with a child figurehead. To some, that made the Lannisters weaker. To others, it made them more formidable. For Tywin was not hampered by Joffrey's capriciousness. Tywin's brand of cruelty was more methodical, more strategic. And his capacity for forging alliances, though overshadowed by fear, might keep the Lannisters afloat even in the storm of war. Robb Stark, encamped in the Riverlands, received the news from a raven just before dawn. He was in his command tent with his mother, Catelyn, and a few trusted lords. The letter bore a broken seal with the crowned stag and lion, the old Baratheon Lannister sigil. Robb read the brief missive twice, his breath fogging in the chilly morning air. When he finished, he handed it to his mother. Joffrey is dead, he said, voice hushed with disbelief. They say Tywin Lannister killed him during a clash in the Red Keep. The new king is Tommen, only a boy. Catelyn Stark's eyes flicked over the parchment. She inhaled sharply. So the Lannisters are indeed devouring themselves. Did they offer any mention of a truce or negotiations for peace? Robb shook his head. No, they only state that King Tommen now sits the throne, that all rebellious lords must bend the knee or face destruction. Lord Tywin is regent. There's also a note about a forthcoming alliance with House Tyrell. Catelyn set the letter aside. The brazier in the corner of the tent glowed red, pushing back the early autumn chill. If Tywin has taken full control, he will not show leniency. He's the man who ordered Harrenhal's horrors and unleashed the mountain in our lands. But we might exploit the turmoil of the Lannisters turning on themselves. Robb nodded, bracing his hands on the wooden table that served as their war map. We have an advantage for a time. Their lines of supply from the west might be less secure while Tywin reorganizes. If we can retake Riverrun and gather more support from the River Lords, we might strike a crippling blow. She moved closer, touching his arm. Be cautious, Robb. Tywin might be wounded by these events, but a wounded lion is all the more dangerous. He still has the largest army, and now presumably the full backing of Highgarden if the Tyrell marriage goes forward. Robb acknowledged the wisdom of her words. A flicker of anger crossed his face. They beheaded father. Then they murdered Tyrion among themselves. And now they turn on Joffrey. There's no unity in them, only ambition and cruelty. We must put an end to their stranglehold on the throne. For father, for the North. Catelyn saw the steel in her son's eyes, remembering the boy he had been, now shaped into a young warlord. She prayed silently that the direwolves would guide them. The war had brought her so much sorrow already. But if the Lannisters were truly fracturing, maybe there was a chance the North could gain the upper hand. Meanwhile, across the sea of dust and broken fields, Tywin Lannister rode with his retinue from King's Landing to Harrenhal, then beyond to the banks of the Red Fork. The roads were rife with rumors of the new boy king. Soldiers who recognized Tywin's banners stood straighter, saluting the man who had just forcibly taken control of the capital. Peasants shrank back, uncertain whether to fear him more or less than they had feared Joffrey. They had heard stories of Tywin's terrifying efficiency, how he had scoured the countryside for traitors, how entire villages had burned under his watch in the previous rebellion. Yet some dared to hope that his calculated approach would be kinder than Joffrey's random brutality. Others scoffed at that notion. Kindness was not a word used for Tywin Lannister. The old lion arrived at Harrenhal under the reddening sky of dusk. The massive fortress loomed black and broken, like the carcass of some ancient beast. Smoke drifted from a few remaining fireplaces within, and the stench of neglect clung to the halls. It was said Harrenhal was cursed, that no house could hold it long before meeting a terrible fate. But Tywin dismissed such superstitions. To him, Harrenhal was merely a strategic stronghold. He stationed his men there, conferred with the garrison, and inquired after any word of Robb Stark's movements. A messenger informed him that Robb Stark's forces lingered around Riverrun, pushing back at the Lannister outriders. The word was that the young wolf had not yet lost a battle, nor had he forgiven the Lannisters for Ned Stark's death. Tywin regarded the news silently, his expression carved in stone. He dismissed the messenger and called for a war council. They gathered in the great hall of Harrenhal, a cavernous space that dwarfed even some throne rooms in Westeros. Torches sputtered along the walls, revealing the cracked pillars and massive hearth. At the long table in the center sat the Lannister commanders, plus a scattering of lesser lords who had pledged loyalty to House Lannister under duress or necessity. Tywin spoke, his voice resonating in the hush. We have a simple objective: break the Stark-Tully alliance in the Riverlands. Once that is done, the North will be forced to sue for peace. The boy has proven dangerously competent, so we will not underestimate him. However, we have certain advantages he does not. He surveyed the men. Some were older knights, others were younger but proven in battle. Ser Gregor Clegane was absent. Tywin had sent him on a separate mission months prior, and the mountain's current whereabouts were uncertain, likely terrorizing some corner of the Riverlands. Ser Adam Marbrand was present, along with Lord Brax, Lord Lefford, and other Westermen of repute. Tywin continued, Our first step is to secure Harrenhal as an unassailable base, then push forth to sever Robb Stark's lines of supply. Lord Bolton and Lord Frey are cooperating. They have their own interests, but we can harness that. The Freys remain at the Twins, guarding the crossing. Stark will have no easy route north if we threaten from the south. One of the lords cleared his throat. And what of negotiation, my lord? Could we not offer peace if the Starks release any prisoners, or if they bend the knee to King Tommen? Tywin's lips curled in distaste. Robb Stark is too proud to bend the knee after his father's murder, particularly now that he thinks we are weakened by the events in King's Landing. The time for half measures has passed. We must crush their capacity to resist. I intend to do so swiftly. They nodded, though a few exchanged wary glances. Cracking the northern host was no small task. Yet Tywin Lannister was not known for idle boasts. He had orchestrated the destruction of House Rain. He had hammered rebellions in the past. If anyone could break the back of the Stark-Tully alliance, it was he, especially once the Tyrell support was more firmly pledged. Tywin went on, explaining the next phases of his plan, which involved drawing Robb Stark into a trap. As the torches sputtered, the men leaned in, listening intently. If Tyrion's cunning had once provided alternate paths, Tywin now relied on brutality paired with cunning of his own. Joffrey's ghost lingered in no one's mind here. These were men of war, each seeking gold, glory, or survival. The meeting ended deep in the night, with Tywin confident that the necessary pieces were in motion. Back in King's Landing, the city prepared, somewhat half-heartedly, for the arrival of the Tyrell retinue. Banners of golden roses were hung on a few walls, though many were torn or dirted, still showing signs of the fighting that had spilled out in the Red Keep corridors. Cersei, though nominally in charge of the preparations as Tommen's mother, left most of the details to Pycelle and Kevan Lannister. She drifted about the keep like a restless specter, her once flashing green eyes dulled by grief and wine. It was on the morning of the Tyrells' arrival that Sansa Stark stood by a high window, overlooking the city gates. From her vantage, she could see the dusty roads leading up to King's Landing. A column of bright banners rippled in the breeze. The sun caught the edges of armor, shining off helmet crests and horse barding. The Tyrell train was indeed large. She recognized the main banner, a golden rose on a field of green. She felt her heart quicken with an odd mixture of curiosity and anxiety. What new changes would come with Margaery Tyrell? Would it somehow improve her own prospects, or merely shift the shape of her captivity? She heard a footstep behind her and turned to see Shae standing quietly in the doorway. Since Tyrion's death, Shae had drifted around the keep, often assigned to menial tasks. In truth, Tyrion had never revealed her presence to his father or sister in the canonical storyline, but in this altered version, she had hidden herself as best she could until the day Tyrion was executed, after which she was discovered by certain stewards. Cersei had not known what to do with the woman. She ended up assigned to laundry and occasional service in the kitchens. Yet Shae's true loyalty had been to Tyrion alone. Sansa offered a sad little smile. "Hello," she said. Shae twisted a corner of her apron in her hands. I heard the Tyrells have come. Perhaps the city will see more feasts, more celebrations. Maybe that's good for everyone." Sansa glanced out the window again, watching the Tyrell knights approach the gates. "Yes, perhaps." She lowered her voice. "Are you well, Shae? I know. Everything must feel strange, now that Tyrion is gone." Shae dipped her head. "I manage. At least they haven't thrown me out on the streets. Or worse." They stood in silence for a moment, each thinking of the dead imp who had tried, in his own flawed way, to protect those he cared for. Sansa wondered if Tyrion's cunning might have found a path for her to escape, had he lived. Now that chance was lost. Shae looked at Sansa with a hint of lingering defiance. "If you ever do find a way to leave this place, take me with you." Sansa blinked, then nodded slowly. "I promise I'll try." At midday, the procession from Highgarden entered the Red Keep's outer bailey. Bright pennons fluttered overhead. The golden rose, accompanied by the sigils of lesser Tyrell bannermen. The smell of horses and perfumed riders clashed with the usual city stench. Margaery Tyrell rode at the head, seated on a palfrey as white as snow. Her dark curls were woven with small gold roses, and she wore a gown of forest green embroidered with a subtle pattern of thorns. Beside her rode her formidable grandmother, Lady Olenna, known as the Queen of Thorns, a petite but sharp-tongued woman who missed nothing. A small welcoming committee awaited them. Kevan Lannister, Ser Jaime, Grand Maester Pycelle, and other dignitaries. A handful of gold cloaks and knights in Lannister colors formed a line. Trumpets sounded, though the effect was muted by the knowledge that the last royal wedding in King's Landing had ended in blood. People remembered the purple wedding from the original timeline, but here it was overshadowed by an even darker turn. For Joffrey had died not by poison but by his own grandfather's sword, days after executing Tyrion. The city had grown suspicious of grand ceremonies. Margaery dismounted gracefully, her expression composed. Kevan greeted her with a short bow. "Lady Margaery, welcome to King's Landing. We are delighted by your arrival for the betrothal to King Tommen." Margaery inclined her head politely. "Thank you, Lord Kevan. The honor is mine. My father sends his regards and is eager to solidify this union between our houses." Lady Olenna climbed down from her litter, turning a withering glance on the courtiers who rushed to help her. "No, no, I've walked these old bones enough," she muttered. Then she fixed her bright eyes on Kevin. "Lord Tywin is absent, yes? Off to war." Kevin bobbed his head again. "He is, my lady. Lord Tywin has entrusted us to ensure all is prepared for the royal wedding. He will return when his duties permit." "Humph," Olenna sniffed. "Off cleaning up the mess your dreadful little tyrant caused, I suppose." She eyed Jaime with interest. "You must be the Kingslayer, yes. That hair of yours is quite distinctive." Jaime tensed slightly but offered a curt nod. "I am Ser Jaime Lannister, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard now, sworn to protect King Tommen." "King Tommen," Olenna repeated, as if testing the name on her tongue. "Let us see if this boy can manage a better temperament than the last one." "Eh?" She cast a pointed look at Margaery. "You'll want to see the Child King, my dear. We have a wedding to plan, no doubt with less fuss and more caution this time." Margaery gave her grandmother a tolerant smile, then turned back to Kevin. "Yes, Lord Kevin. Lead on, if you please. We are eager to meet his grace." They conducted Margaery and Olenna through the Red Keep's main hallways. Certain sections still showed signs of the recent clashes. Scorch marks on walls, chipped marble, occasional tapestries hastily hung to hide bloodstains. Margaery took in these details with a polite but discerning eye. Olenna, unburdened by courtesy, clicked her tongue at every sign of disrepair. Jaime followed at a slight distance, exchanging glances with Kevin. The tension was evident. At last, they reached the throne room, where Tommen waited with Cersei, Pycelle, and a smattering of courtiers. Tommen looked small atop the iron throne, his feet hardly reaching the footstool. He wore a short crimson cloak pinned with a golden lion brooch, and his crown, a simpler version of the one Joffrey had worn, slipped slightly on his brow. He swallowed nervously when he saw Margaery approach, but he tried to keep his composure. Cersei stood by him, pale and silent, wearing a rigid expression of formality. "Your Grace," Margaery said with a graceful curtsy. "I am at your service." Tommen cleared his throat. "Lady Margaery, we are pleased you have come to King's Landing." He glanced at his mother for reassurance, but Cersei looked away. Tommen pressed on. "Our houses have long been allies. We look forward to strengthening those ties." Margaery smiled, her voice gentle. "As do I, your Grace. I hope to be a good queen to you and to the people of the city." Olenna stepped forward, eyeing Tommen with a speculative gaze. "Yes, well, see that they feed the child properly. He looks half-starved." She glanced at Cersei. "We shall need to discuss the wedding feast, of course. I won't have our Margaery wed in a dreary gloom. A little color never hurt anyone." Cersei managed a thin, polite smile. "Of course, Lady Olenna. We will arrange the feast to reflect the union of our houses." Olenna sniffed but said no more. The formalities concluded, and Margaery was escorted away to be shown her new chambers, a suite once meant for the queen. Cersei stiffened at the notion that Margaery would soon displace her, but she said nothing, aware that Tommen's throne stood upon a precarious alliance with the Tyrells. She wanted to scorn Margaery's attempts at warmth, wanted to resent the girl for stepping into a role that had once been Joffrey's fiancée. But Cersei's grief had hollowed her out. She could only watch as Margaery departed, followed by half the courtiers, all praising her beauty and generosity. The throne room emptied. Tommen slid off the throne and approached his mother, eyes anxious. "Did I do well, mother?" he asked in a small voice. Cersei forced a tight smile and patted his shoulder. "Yes, Tommen, you did as you should," she sighed, glancing around the half-ruined throne room. "We shall see how this wedding unfolds. For now you must rest. Your lessons continue in the morning." The boy nodded, looking relieved to escape the imposing seat of kings. Cersei watched him go, escorted by Pycelle, then turned to find Jaime standing by a pillar, arms crossed. His expression offered neither comfort nor judgment, merely acknowledgement of what was happening. "She's winning him over already?" Cersei muttered, bitterness creeping into her voice. "Margaery, she'll have him wrapped around her little finger." Jaime shrugged. "Tommen's a sweet boy. He desires approval. If Margaery offers kindness where Joffrey offered cruelty, Tommen will respond. Is that such a bad thing?" Cersei's nostrils flared. A mother might wish to be the main influence in her own son's life. Then she stared at the Iron Throne, the twisted swords glinting in torchlight. "If not for that monstrous child I bore first." He broke off, a tremor passing through her. "Never mind." Jaime stepped closer, lowering his voice. "We cannot change what happened with Joffrey, but we can try to ensure Tommen has a better chance." She looked away, her eyes clouded with memories. "There is no going back. I see Joffrey's face at night, in my dreams. Then I wake in a cold sweat." Her voice turned hollow. "I am no mother to Tommen, not truly. I am a shell." Jaime had no reassuring words. He gently touched her arm. "The wedding is soon. The Tyrells will expect us to show them the Lannister strength. Perhaps a lavish feast, some displays of pageantry." Cersei's mouth thinned. "Let them have their extravagance. Care not, as long as they remain in line and do not try to overshadow me entirely. Or overshadow our father, for that matter." Jaime glanced around the empty throne room. He could almost see ghosts flickering near the dais, whispering of all the lives lost in the pursuit of power. "We will do what must be done," he said quietly. The days that followed were a flurry of preparations that felt surreal in a city still marred by recent bloodshed. Servants hung fresh draperies, scoured the floors, and set new braziers to banish the smell of stale smoke. Merchant wagons arrived from the reach bearing crates of flowers, barrels of wine, exotic spices, and fabrics dyed in brilliant hues. Margaery Tyrell set about distributing bread to the poor from the city squares, earning the immediate adoration of many hungry small folk. Lady Olenna supervised the arrangement of the wedding feast, demanding that only the finest courses be served. Tommen, wide-eyed, found himself measured for new doublets and cloaks, while Pycelle droned on about the history of royal weddings. The boy remained anxious, missing his cats and complaining of too many lessons. But Margaery's gentle encouragement, visiting him daily, praising him whenever he remembered a new detail of courtesy, lifted his spirits. Cersei observed from the shadows, her lips pressed thin at Margaery's skill in winning Tommen's trust. Jaime, for his part, tried to maintain an outward calm. He organized the gold cloaks and the Kingsguard, mindful that some threat could still rise from within or without. With Tywin away, Jaime felt the weight of responsibility for Tommen's safety. He also found himself crossing paths with Margaery frequently. She had a habit of including him in her friendly remarks, praising his valor and skill. Jaime could sense she was building alliances, forging friendly ties to the Kingsguard, to Kevin, to any Lannister who might matter. He almost admired her political savvy. All the while, in the background, the hush persisted, an unspoken reminder of the horrors that had occurred not long ago. Tyrion's name was never mentioned, though many must have remembered that he had once been a key figure in King's Landing. Joffrey's memory loomed, too, an unspoken specter. No one dared speak of how the last royal wedding had ended in blood or how Joffrey's death had rent the Red Keep asunder. Instead, they poured themselves into this new wedding, praying that it would somehow cleanse the city's soul. On the eve of the ceremony, King's Landing was abuzz with gossip. Courtiers arrived at the Red Keep in droves, dressed in their finery. The Great September of Baelor would host the wedding, followed by a feast in the throne room. Torches were lit along the main thoroughfare, so that the bride's carriage would pass in splendor. Musicians tuned their lutes and harps. Cooks labored over pastries shaped like roses, boar stuffed with mushrooms and onions, and fish drizzled with lemon sauce. That night, Margaery Tyrell reclined in her temporary solar, gazing into a mirror while her handmaidens braided her hair. Lady Olenna sipped wine in a chair near the window, occasionally offering caustic commentary on the city's failings. When the braiding was done, Margaery dismissed the maids, leaving her alone with her grandmother. "What do you make of this city, grandmother?" Margaery asked, her voice hushed. "I find it strangely subdued, almost haunted." Olenna narrowed her eyes. "Haunted indeed. One can practically smell the ghosts drifting through these corridors. If half the tales I've heard are true, then Joffrey was a monster who deserved the end he got. And that fiasco with Tyrion Lannister, that was the start of their self-inflicted doom." She tapped the arm of her chair. "Let it be a lesson to you, dear. Never let petty cruelty overshadow your ambitions. If you wish to rule, do so with a velvet glove over an iron fist." Joffrey lacked the velvet. Tywin, for all his cunning, lacks warmth as well. Margaery nodded thoughtfully. "We can use that. If I present a more merciful face to the small folk, they will love me, and Tommen by extension. Then House Tyrell can guide the kingdom more gently, but no less effectively." Olenna smirked. "Exactly, but mind your steps around Cersei. She's a mother scorpion if there ever was one, grieving the son she both created and destroyed. She might lash out at you if she feels threatened." Margaery's dark eyes flickered. "I am prepared. I will show her respect in public, though I suspect she will never truly be my friend." With that, Lady Olenna rose, setting aside her wine. "Sleep if you can. Tomorrow you wed a boy king, forging an alliance that might outlast these troubled times. Or it might not. War has a way of devouring hopes. But we will do our best." They exchanged a wry smile, and Olenna departed, leaving Margaery alone with her thoughts. The young woman stared at the moonlight on the floor, pondering the vow she would make to a child. She would be queen once more, but queen to a realm battered by war, haunted by the memory of a monstrous king and a shattered family. She silently vowed to ensure that no matter how precarious House Lannister's grip might be, House Tyrell would flower in the midst of it. Morning broke with a pale haze over the city. The great September of Baelor stood resplendent, newly scrubbed, its towering dome gleaming in the sunlight. The wedding procession arrived mid-morning. Margaery rode in a lavish carriage, accompanied by her ladies, with a small guard of Tyrell knights. Tommen, escorted by Jaime and the Kingsguard, came from the Red Keep. The small folk lined the streets, curiosity piqued, some cheering weakly, others simply watching with guarded eyes. A wedding, they thought, was better than another public execution, at least. Within the sept, the High Septon performed the rites. Tommen wore a new doublet of red velvet trimmed with gold, looking every bit the child overshadowed by the spectacle. Margaery wore a pale green gown embroidered with golden roses at the hem and neckline. Cersei stood to one side, her features carved into a polite mask. Kevan Lannister presided in place of Tywin, who was absent at war. The Septon spoke of unity, of the blessings of the Seven, of forging a new dawn for the realm. His words echoed under the high dome. When it was time for the vows, Tommen's voice trembled, but he managed to recite his lines clearly. Margaery spoke hers with gentle confidence. The final blessing was pronounced, and they turned to face the assembled nobility. Applause broke out, accompanied by the hum of an organ. Tommen looked almost relieved, while Margaery bestowed a warm smile upon him that made him blush. Even from a distance, Cersei's tense posture revealed how much she loathed having to share the stage with the new queen. The wedding party moved to the Red Keep for the feast. There, the throne room had been redecorated with green and gold hangings to honor House Tyrell. Platters of roasted meats, fresh breads, candied fruits, and elaborate pastries lined the tables. Musicians played cheerful tunes. A new dais had been raised for the young king and queen, with seats for the royal family and the higher lords. Kevan Lannister made the official toasts. Lady Olenna offered a witty quip or two, drawing polite laughter from the courtiers. Margaery charmed many by sending out baskets of sugared almonds to be distributed among the lesser guests. Sansa Stark, seated among the ladies of the court, watched all of this with a distant expression. She recalled how she had once dreamed of a grand wedding in the capital, never imagining the horrors that would unfold. Now, she bore witness to a wedding that was meant to heal a city's wounds, yet felt overshadowed by ghostly reminders of the last wedding's brutality. As she picked at a small piece of spiced honey cake, she could not help but glance at the dais, where Tommen sat with Margaery. At least the boy had kind eyes. She prayed, in her heart, that this union might herald a gentler era than Joffrey's cruelty. For a time, it seemed the city might exhale a sigh of relief. Wine flowed, minstrels sang ballads of chivalry, and the mood lifted beyond what King's Landing had experienced in many months. After the travails of Joffrey's rule, any reprieve, however temporary, was welcomed. The hush was replaced by a tentative bustle of conversation, the sense that perhaps, with Tywin away, the city could enjoy a fleeting semblance of normal life. Yet as the feast wore on, a subtle tension crackled beneath the surface. Cersei drank more than she ate, ignoring the thin-lipped glances of the courtiers. She made a toast to Tommen's long reign that somehow felt more like an accusation than a blessing. Lady Olenna kept a watchful eye on every detail, ensuring Margaery remained the shining centerpiece. Jaime circulated among the tables, one hand always near his sword hilt, as if expecting trouble to erupt at any moment. He nodded greetings to various lords, ignoring pointed questions about Tywin's next move. The hours passed without bloodshed, to the relief of many. Dancers performed a graceful routine, then gave way to a troupe of jugglers. Tommen laughed, clapping his hands when a juggler spun flaming torches. Margaery's sweet laughter echoed beside him. Even the hardened soldiers present felt a twinge of hope, seeing a king who was still a child of gentle spirit. Perhaps King's Landing had a chance to see peace again. Eventually, the formal festivities ended, and the wedding party escorted Tommen and Margaery from the throne room to their newly prepared chambers, symbolically sending them to bed, though it was widely understood that the marriage would not be consummated until Tommen was older. The lords and ladies continued to mingle or began drifting away to private gatherings. By midnight, the largest portion of the crowd had dispersed. The green and gold decorations fluttered in the torchlight, and the hush returned, like a cat slipping in through a cracked door. Cersei retreated to her chambers before the final guests were gone. Jaime, noticing her exit, followed. He found her in her sitting room, slumped on a couch, still wearing her formal gown. Her cheeks were flushed with wine. She stared at the flickering glow of a nearby candle as though entranced by its dancing flame. "Sister," he said softly, closing the door behind him, "why did you slip away?" She turned her head, a bitter curve to her lips. "I could not stand another moment of that facade." Margaery shining like a maiden from a song, Tommen gawking at her. Everyone cheering for a union that might placate the Tyrells while we remain at war. She tossed back the last of her wine. "I am the Queen Mother, and yet I feel more like an unwelcome guest in my own house." Jaime moved to stand behind the couch. "It is a difficult time, Cersei. The realm must see unity, or else Tywin's entire strategy fails." She let out a hollow laugh. "Ah yes, Father's grand strategy. He always has a plan. To think, if Tyrion were here, he might have outmaneuvered the Tyrells in a more subtle fashion. But he's not." She stared at the candle's flame, a haunted look in her eyes. "I wonder, Jaime, do you ever think about what might have been if we had not let Joffrey kill Tyrion?" He looked away, his jaw tight. "I do, more often than you might guess." She set her goblet aside and closed her eyes. "If I could carve out my heart, rid myself of these regrets, perhaps I would. But every day I see the consequences. I lost Joffrey, I lost my father's trust, I lost Tyrion. Even though I never loved him, he was still my blood. And now Tommen is overshadowed by a Tyrell bride. What do I have left, truly?" Jaime reached out and touched her shoulder gently. "You have your life. You have Tommen, even if you are no longer the sole influence on him. And you have me." She leaned back against the cushions, letting out a shaky breath. "Yes, I have you. At least until Father commands otherwise." A silence fell. The hush in the keep was complete, as if the walls themselves were listening. Jaime wished he had some comfort to offer, some reassurance that the future might be kinder. But the memory of Joffrey's death, Tyrion's execution, and the fracturing of their house weighed heavy. Instead, he quietly settled beside her, offering his presence if not his words. Cersei did not protest. For a moment, they were just two people locked in a silent realm of regret and sorrow, dwarfed by the monstrous tapestry of war and ambition. In the days following the wedding, Margaery Tyrell set about her queenly duties with a tireless energy. She visited the sept daily, prayed with the small folk, handed out alms to the hungry, and flitted through the Red Keep's corridors, always with a kind word. She sought out Sansa Stark as well, inviting her to take tea in a small solar near the gardens. This was the first time Sansa had ever spoken with Margaery at length, and she found the new queen to be gracious, warm, and surprisingly shrewd. They sat at a small table set with rosehip tea and delicate honey cakes. Margaery wore a modest green dress, her hair arranged simply, while Sansa was in pale blue. Sunlight streamed through the window, illuminating swirling motes of dust. "Sansa," Margaery said, pouring tea for them both. "We have so much in common. We are both from great houses. Both have lost family to this wretched war. I hope we can be friends." Sansa managed a timid smile. "You're very kind, Your Grace, but I'm not sure if—" Margaery reached over and lightly touched her hand. "Kindness costs nothing, and we must cling to it where we can. You've been through more than most women twice your age." A shadow passed across Sansa's face, remembering Joffrey's torments, the sight of Tyrion's final moments, her father's head. "Yes," she whispered, "but you are queen now. I'm sure you have little need of me." Margaery gave a soft laugh. "Nonsense. Every queen needs good companions. Ladies she can trust. There is much you might share with me about the North, about your family's traditions. We are one realm after all, or so I hope it will be again someday." Sansa's eyes brimmed with cautious hope. Did Margaery intend to keep her close out of genuine compassion, or was this another means of keeping a valuable hostage in line? Yet the sincerity in Margaery's gaze seemed real. "If there is anything you need," Margaery said, lowering her voice, "please come to me. I know you cannot simply walk away from the Red Keep, but if you are in any danger, or if someone mistreats you, tell me. I will do what I can to protect you." Sansa bowed her head, gratitude warring with doubt in her heart. "Thank you, Your Grace." They spoke a while longer about small things, fashions in the Reach, songs sung in the North. The conversation felt like an oasis in the desert of fear. Sansa left the solar feeling both a bit lighter and more uncertain. Could the new queen truly be a friend? Or was this a cunning facade? A Tyrell game? In King's Landing, such questions were never easily answered. Outside the capital, the war pressed on. Tywin Lannister pushed deeper into the Riverlands, forging uneasy alliances with Walder Frey and Roose Bolton, men who had their own reasons for undermining Robb Stark. A quiet undercurrent of plotting wound through the Lords of the Trident. Some believed Tywin might orchestrate a grand betrayal. The infamous Red Wedding was rumored, though in this shifted timeline, the specifics remained uncertain. Still, the seeds of treachery were being sown. Robb Stark, for his part, moved his forces strategically around Riverrun, hoping to bait the Lannisters into vulnerable positions. He secured alliances with smaller riverlords outraged by the destruction wrought upon their lands. Yet his mother, Catelyn, warned him that Tywin Lannister would not rest until the North was forced to its knees, or until every wolf had been silenced. Meanwhile, across the sea, Daenerys Targaryen continued her slow rise to power, taking city after city in Slaver's Bay. Her name was spoken in hushed tones by merchants returning to Westeros. Some wondered if a Targaryen invasion might unite the realm in the face of a common threat, or tear it further apart. And up at the wall, the men of the Night's Watch faced growing troubles from wildlings and rumors of darker forces stirring beyond the ice. The realm was vast, and King's Landing's internal strife was but one star in a constellation of crises. Yet for the moment, the story remained focused on the Red Keep, where a child king reigned in name, a Tyrell queen strove to bring a bit of mercy to the realm, and Cersei Lannister dwelled in bitterness over what had been lost. Through it all moved Sansa Stark, hostage and observer, uncertain if her next step would bring salvation or downfall. Late one evening, well after the wedding festivities died down, a cold rain swept the city. The narrow streets turned slick, water trickling along gutters clogged with refuse. A few drunkards wandered home from the taverns, singing off-key. Within the Red Keep, most nobles slept, lulled by the rhythmic patter of rain on stone. Sansa, however, could not sleep. She paced her bedchamber, her shift clinging to her skin in the humid night. Her thoughts churned with longing for her mother and brother, with fear for what might become of her in a city that had already devoured so many. Finally, she decided to light a candle and read one of the old stories she had found in the library. Something about a valiant knight who rescued a princess. A foolish comfort, perhaps, but she needed any scrap of solace she could find. She took up the candle and moved into the corridor, intending to slip into a small reading alcove near the library that she had discovered weeks before. The guards usually paid her little mind, so long as she did not wander off the main floors. The hush of the keep weighed on her shoulders. It was unnerving to walk these corridors at night, where every flicker of torchlight could reveal a lurking shadow. She forced herself to breathe calmly, telling herself that no one would harm her here. Not anymore. As she turned a corner, she stumbled upon a figure hunched over a windowsill, staring out into the rain. The figure whipped around at the sound of her footstep. In the glow of the torch sconce, she recognized Grand Maester Pycelle, though for once he stood tall, his stooped posture momentarily forgotten. "My Lady Sansa," he said, startled. "You gave me a fright." Sansa lowered her candle. "I'm sorry, Grand Maester. Couldn't sleep. I was just going to the library." Pycelle's eyes flicked to the hallway behind her, then back to her. Quite so, quite so. A restless night indeed." He clutched his chain of office. In that moment, Sansa noticed something strange in his expression. Anxiety, perhaps? He forced a benign smile. "Books are excellent company for insomnia. If you wish, I can fetch you a soothing draught from my chambers." She shook her head. "Thank you, but no. I'll manage." Pycelle nodded, then looked back out the window where raindrops crawled down the glass. Sansa hovered, uncertain if she should move on or speak. Something about his demeanor unsettled her. Gone was the doddering old man she was used to seeing drool at council sessions. He looked more alert, more cunning. "Is all well, Grand Maester?" she ventured. He turned slightly, the torchlight outlining every crease on his face. "As well as can be, my lady," he replied softly. "These are trying times. I find myself reflecting on everything that has happened since the war began." His gaze flicked across the corridor, as though checking for eavesdroppers. Such a pity, the death of Lord Tyrion. He was not always easy to love, but he had a mind for governance that might have spared us some of the chaos. Sansa's heart leapt. Rarely had she heard Pycelle speak so openly about Tyrion. She took a careful step closer, lowering her voice. Yes, he was kind to me once." She hesitated. "Why do you mention him now?" Pycelle let out a low sigh. "Because it is part of my duty to ensure the stability of the realm, my lady. Sometimes I wonder if I failed in that duty." Joffrey, he frowned. Joffrey was beyond counsel, and Lord Tywin, for all his brilliance, has hammered unity into dust by kinslaying. Now we have a fragile monarchy, a child king, and a realm still at war. I fear darker storms loom. The corridor lighting flickered, casting wavering shadows on Pycelle's lined features. Sansa felt a chill that had nothing to do with the rainy night. "Darker storms? What do you mean?" He shook his head. "I am only an old man. Perhaps I see phantoms where none exist. But I recall the days when the Targaryens fought among themselves, and how that fracturing led to ruin. A house at war with itself seldom stands. The Lannisters have begun to devour each other. That is no secret. The Tyrell alliance may hold, or it may break. The North will not yield lightly. Each day the war drags on, the realm bleeds, and new threats will inevitably rise." Sansa hugged her arms. "I do not know what to do, Grand Maester. Pycelle offered a thin smile, one that seemed tinged with genuine sympathy. "Pray, my lady, pray to your gods or any gods that the madness will end before the entire realm is ground to dust. A war of 5 kings is already too many, but we may soon see a war of 10 claimants if this continues. Ambition is a weed that grows fast in a garden watered by blood." With that, he gathered his robe around him and shuffled away, reverting to the stooped posture he typically presented. Sansa watched him go, candle trembling in her hand. The hush of the keep felt heavier than ever, as if it were the lull before an even more violent storm. Tywin Lannister's campaign in the Riverlands intensified. He marched his forces relentlessly, forging a stranglehold around Riverrun. Word reached King's Landing that a decisive confrontation might loom. Meanwhile, the Tyrells pressed for a seat on the small council from Margaery's relatives, embedding themselves deeper into the city's power structure. In the Red Keep, after a few weeks of calm, Cersei resumed her presence at court, overshadowing Kevin in small council sessions and second-guessing Margaery's public works. Jaime found himself intervening in constant squabbles between them, with Varys quietly observing from the sidelines, ever the spider spinning unseen webs. Sansa Stark continued to drift in the background, a porcelain figure of sorrow who privately yearned for a chance to escape. The hush over the keep was no longer absolute. Now it was broken by small bursts of laughter. Margaery's doings in the courtyard, Tommen playing with kittens, the occasional flourish of music. Yet an undercurrent of tension remained. Guards patrolled with watchful eyes, for fear that some new crisis might erupt. At night, dreams of the past haunted many. Tyrion's final plea, Joffrey's final scream, the battered bodies of soldiers in the corridors. Shadows of kinslaying and betrayal seeped into each day's routine. And so the realm pressed on, teetering between fragile alliances and renewed conflict. For every gesture of mercy, there seemed to be a whispered threat. For every moment of respite, a rumor of fresh battles. House Lannister was not the unified Golden Lion of old, but it remained formidable enough to keep the Iron Throne in Tommen's name. The question whispered by every courtier, from Sansa Stark to Grand Maester Pycelle, was whether that fragile hold would endure, or if the hush of the Red Keep would break once more under the weight of blood and steel. In the quiet hours of early dawn, the gulls cried over Blackwater Bay, and the city stirred, uncertain of what the new day might bring. King Tommen, gentle and impressionable, woke to Margaery's kind smile. Cersei rose from a restless sleep, already brooding over her next maneuver. Jaime donned his armor, walking the keep's corridors with the memory of Tyrion's death echoing in the emptiness. And somewhere far away, Tywin Lannister advanced his armies, determined to secure a final victory for a house that had already shattered itself from within. Such was the aftermath of that fateful moment when Joffrey Baratheon, in his arrogance, had ordered Tyrion's head struck from his shoulders, setting into motion the downfall of the house that once roared. Now, like a wounded beast, House Lannister limped forward, seeking to hold the realm in its jaws while its own insides bled. The hush was not peace. It was only the grim lull of a nation that had seen too much horror and suspected there was still more to come. And in that hush, the ghosts of Ned Stark and Tyrion Lannister seemed to linger, silent reminders that the sword of vengeance, once drawn, could not easily be sheathed, and that a crown forged in cruelty and betrayal would forever be stained by the blood of kin.